English translation trouble with the 900th contact report by Bernadette Brand.
Based on a suggestion from Bermunda, who felt that the problems with the current correction of the 900th contact report should be recorded and prefixed to the report, the following came about. On the 7th of November 2024 in the morning, Billy brought me a data stick on which the 900th contact report was stored, which he had been working on for a week because he was already having major problems retrieving the report. As whole sections of text and individual words kept disappearing, sentences were mixed up, or words were interspersed with numbers or punctuation marks, which he had to laboriously correct. When he handed me the stick, USB flash drive with the report for pre-correction, he said that I should be careful because there may have been text repetitions and text shifts, and that words and parts of sentences could also be missing. He explained this to me not only based on his experience that such things regularly occur when retrieving contact reports, but also because this time he had particularly big problems retrieving the contact conversation. It was more than the usual thing that always makes life difficult for him when he is writing on his computer, which he had told me repeatedly since he started working on the current report. So I took the stick and immediately started correcting it, and soon realized that words were obviously missing, and whole sentences had been mixed up so that they no longer made correct sense. I also came across parts of the text that appeared twice throughout the report. Twice it was 4 lines each, and the third time it was almost 2 pages. As usual, I marked these parts of the text that were repeated word for word with red and a double strike through. As usual, I tried to fill in the obviously missing words with words that made the sentence understandable and logical. Although these are of course only suggestions on my part, which Billy will replace during the proofreading process if they do not fit or do not correspond to the facts of the conversation. I also tried to straighten out sentences that had got mixed up so that I thought they made sense and were readable. As I can make the corrections on the computer and do not have to work on a paper printout, I mark my suggested corrections. Incorrect words, duplicate text passages, and incorrectly positioned parts of sentences in red and cross them out, even if they are only individual letters, numbers, or punctuation marks. Once the work was done, I gave Billy back the data stick with the corrected file so that he could check my corrections and correct them if necessary. Normally he returns the corrected file to me, and I check everything again before passing it on to Christian and Daniela, the 2 main proofreaders. This time, however, everything was different. While I was still checking the cleaned file, in which Billy had inserted a lot of individual words and whole sections of text in green, he called me and explained that I should interrupt my work because Quetzal had noticed that whole passages of the conversation that had taken place were missing, and that he was coming round to help Billy with the correction. 2 days later, on the 9th of November, I received Billy's corrections back, asking me to be careful when checking them, because it was possible that parts of the text could still be duplicated and sentences twisted, and that he had written his corrections back into the file in green as usual. What awaited me then almost brought me to the brink of despair, because I realized that not only had the corrections made been partially reversed, but that the text parts marked in red and crossed out twice were also still in place, but this time not red and crossed out, but black and bold. As I was aware of the urgency of the work, I checked the file until the early hours of the morning, but then threw in the towel at around 2:30 hours in the morning because it was just getting too stupid and too annoying. Before I retired, however, I went back into the house and was intercepted by Billy under the front door with the bad news that I could stop the control work because he would have to call up and check everything again from scratch, as the extent of the error was significantly greater than I had originally realized. He explained to me that Quetzal, Bermunda, and Jana and Florina had been with him since 1:30 hours and would support and help him with the work. On Sunday lunchtime, Billy told me that they had been working on the contact report until 6:30 hours and that they still had not finished. However, he would now continue on his own and try to finalize the report. On Monday 11.11/24, I received the file back with the comment that everything had now been checked and completed and that everything should be in order. Only the words, sentences, and parts of the text marked in green still needed to be corrected. In the meantime, however, I had become suspicious, which is why I decided to go through the whole report again thoroughly, word for word, just to be on the safe side. And lo and behold, I was not mistaken, because once again it turned out that errors that I had marked in red from the beginning were still there, which is why I naturally marked them in red again and crossed them out twice before giving the contact report to Billy again for checking. This time, after the third attempt, it actually seemed to have worked, because all the red and green corrections were still there, and the duplicate text passages that had started all the trouble were no longer there either. What is also interesting about the whole story is that the overall size of the report remained the same the whole time, which means that the parts and text passages removed from the report corresponded exactly to the size of the duplicate text passages. After more than 6 days of time-consuming, tiring, and energy-sapping work, the contact report was finally ready to be forwarded to Christian and Daniela. But far from it, because in the meantime, for some unknown reason, the internet connection to the shed had been damaged and failed, and since midday on the 12th of November 2024, any network connection has apparently been cut for a long time.
900th contact. Wednesday, 30th October, 2024, 8:23 hours.
Greetings, dear friend. But it is a little awkward for me to come here today without checking with you first to see if it is convenient for you. But it urges me.
Do not worry about it, because it is always convenient for me when one of you comes here. What is it that brings you here?
It is really private, that Quetzal also wants to come here in about 30 minutes.
Good. Then I guess that is enough time to sort it all out, to which I have the following to say.
Thank you so much for your understanding.
That is just the way it is, and you cannot just change that. So then,
This is very helpful for me, and so,
yes, but you cannot just change it, because besides,
that is indeed the case, and you may be sure of my thanks for your counseling. But now I want to go, because Quetzal will not keep me waiting. His punctuality is well known to me. So goodbye, dear friend. But I do not want to forget that Florina and Bermunda will be coming to see you in the next few days and have a lot to report. Goodbye, Edward, my friend.
I cannot wait to hear what Bermunda has to report.
You know what you have seen together, and Bermunda cannot cope with that. She has spoken to me and Florina and also to Quetzal about it, and explained to us that she is burdened by what she has seen and does not know how to cope with everything. And since you are well versed in that, is why we advised her to talk to you about it.
I am happy to do that. It is really not easy to see these kinds of incidents, and it is clear to me that this is exactly what Netanyahu wants, that he can realize his genocidal mania. Because the fact that for the most part only women and children are killed by the Israeli military, ordered by Netanyahu, that is the purpose of the exercise, as they say. The fact that the majority of those killed are women and children, but the minority are Hamas and Hezbollah fighters, ensures that no more offspring can be conceived and born. In my opinion, the fact that so many children are murdered is due to the heinous fact that they are not supposed to grow up, which means that male children do not grow up to be men and cannot take up arms or also wage war. This, while girls cannot grow up and cannot become pregnant or also bear offspring. This, among other things, is what prevents Netanyahu's genocidal mania from being thwarted.
This is indeed an argument that can be effectively reality. But we have not considered this because these kinds of Ausartungen intrigues are foreign to us. Consequently, we still have a lot to learn in this regard.
You are not Earthlings either, so you also do not know all the many possibilities of Earthling ways of thinking and their Ausartungen. as I, on the contrary, have fathomed these throughout my entire life, on the basis of what countless earthlings afford themselves with regard to all kinds of Asartungan. Besides, you were not here at the time of Svath, and excuse me, despite your age and many years of being here, you are somehow greenlings in the matter of the degenerate thoughts and actions of earthlings. And you still do not seem to have realized that all this Asartung is based on the many different beliefs of the various religions and the sects that have emerged from them. This despite the fact that Arlean Dot.
All this is unknown to us. Moreover, we only know much regarding you from Svath's annals, but not very much about the thoughts and actions of the Earth humans. Therefore, there is still a great deal of learning for us to do, which we are endeavoring to do by exploring everything imaginable on Earth. This is not easy for us because time and again we realize that we have allowed ourselves to be deceived. But now I really have to go. Goodbye.
Also goodbye, and really do not worry.
I just caught that. I am talking about the fact that Injana has just left. Greetings, Edward, my friend. She said what is real, and if you call us greenlings in terms of understanding the thoughts and actions of Earth humans, then you are correct. My grandfather knew a lot about this, and very well, as can be seen from his annals. However, there are other annals on this subject that remain closed to us, and that we may only open when...
Yes, you have just crossed paths. Greetings also, my friend, and what you say about further annals, I know nothing about that. What is your reason for wanting to see me and not waiting until Sunday, since we agreed that you would come back then?
It has become important that you...
I can argue with that.
Yes, I understand that, but it has come about that...
Oh, I was thinking that. But then I do not want to write that down when I bring our conversation in and write it down. I just want to mark it with dots. But what you are talking about?
I will leave that up to you, but it might be better if you...
Yes, I think that also. Let us see what can be done. And what you say about the war leaders, they are all sick in the same hospital of idiocy, megalomania, revenge, and hatred, except that some are worse than others. But it really is the case that the clown Zelensky is a very bad and vicious warmonger, who far outstrips even the senile U.S. President Biden in this respect and does not want peace under any circumstances. His war fanaticism does not allow him to think normally, which already only corresponds to a sham thinking anyway, because he is trapped by religious shackles, this time Jewish ones, whereas with Hitler they were somehow Christian and esoteric. As Svath noted at the time, Adolf Hitler largely kept quiet about what his real beliefs were, so effectively nobody knew what he actually believed. Svath told me at the time that his real faith was Christian esoteric superstitious, which is why he also affirmed the esoteric and witchcraft delusions and the research that the delusional. Madmen and lunatics of his esoteric troupe harbored in this regard and conducted their research all over the world, chasing after nebulous things. The fact that people lost their lives as a result of this nonsense was completely irrelevant to all of the madmen. Also in relation to the so-called spiritual, which mistakenly refers to the spirit, which in reality does not exist, and the term is completely wrong. Because the energy that enlivens human beings is the life energy of the creation, which animates every genus and species of life forms of fauna and flora. The term spirit, as the creation life energy is mistakenly called, comes from a modification of the Indo-European term gis, which originally had the meaning to be upset, to be terrified, to be frightened, to be excited, to be afraid, and to be seized, as well as to shudder, etc. thus. The human being's mood and vigor, or rather his or her zest and mood, is also addressed. The term spirit, however, originally comes from ancient Greek and in this form addresses the creative life energy of human beings, namely with the term pneuma. In Latin, the spirit is called spiritus, and in Hebrew ruach and Arabic ruh. Then there is English, as it is called mind, spirit, and in French esprit. Basically, it is an inconsistent term that is used in philosophy, theology, psychology, and everyday language. But in general, the term spirit belongs to esotericism, although the term spiritual somehow has something irrational, mysterious about it that can supposedly only be understood by initiates, whereas the term spirit as a practical use is more of a purely theoretical nature. And if this means that this question here, which was sent to me and which I was asked to put to you so that you would please answer it, what animus or anima and yin and yang mean, then I can also do that. These terms actually come from C.G. Jung, who described the so-called soul of human beings as anima, whereby he drew a distinction between the feminine and the masculine. According to his findings, the anima is the unconscious male side of the woman, while the animus is the unconscious female side of the man. According to C.G. Jung, anima and animus therefore mean the factor of the unconscious of women and men that is characterized by the opposite sex. And if I now explain yin and yang, then I have to say that according to Chinese philosophy, yin and yang are actually based on opposites in the world as a whole, such as man and woman or female and male, religiously heaven and hell, earth and water, calm and hectic. Yin and yang form the foundation of the teachings of traditional Chinese medicine TCM. The teaching of yin and yang also states that a balanced state is created when yin and yang complement each other perfectly and together form an absolutely perfect whole. In other words, two similar energies and forces form a whole when they join together. Unfortunately, however, in Chinese teachings, as everywhere on earth and since time immemorial, everything is divided into black and white or into female and male, with the female being depicted as black and the male as white, as is also the case with the yin-yang sign. The feminine black side is probably seen as bad, negative and sad, as darkness, but also as the soft, resting and receiving side, while the white or the other side represents masculinity, the good, positive and cheerful, the light or brightness and warmth as well as active giving. I think this answers these questions of what is right. But my question is this. Do you have anything else to explain about this, or possibly something to criticize?
I cannot comment on that, because I have no knowledge of what you were talking about. This C.G. Jung you were talking about, who was this man and what is or was his work?
His name was Carl Gustav Jung. He died in 1961, and he was a psychiatrist. I got to know him by chance at the Bergholzli in Zurich, where he was working at the time. I was still a boy at the time, when I was visiting the Matilda Escher home with my mother, where Verena, my sister, was being cared for as a severely disabled person. And I went down to the Bergholzli in between because I was curious about what was going on there, and went into this spinning wind, as they said. It was an insane asylum, a spin wind, as the Bergholzli Psychiatric Hospital was called, where in 1980 I was once supposed to visit Mr. I have forgotten his name, and get him out of the nut house because he was going crazy with his girlfriend in Germany and was deported to Bergholzli in Switzerland. He visited the center once, but that was probably 30 or more years ago. Now I remember that he phoned me again about 6 months ago and wanted to come here again. He is probably also 80 years old or so, about the same age as Judy Reed from the USA, who gave me the name Billy in Tehran, Persia. And I am the Shah-in-Shah, that is to say, after that I went to West Pakistan and then to India, where I met the President of India, Dr. Radhakrishnan, at the Ashoka Ashram on Gurgaon Road near Marauli, when he was present when I was shot at and hit in the left arm. All of this suddenly comes back to me like a film. Also, that I caught snakes there, a black 2-meter cobra, for example, which I brought home to Switzerland and then gave to the telephone operator Heidi Neff at Zurich main station. And that I clipped the camel's pointed teeth. That also comes to mind, because I also did that because I had to earn money to be able to live.
From your adolescent years, you were a human being who did all kinds of work, however it came about, and this must have remained the same throughout your life. My grandfather Sfath already wrote in his annals that this would probably continue throughout your entire life. I also know from my grandfather's annals that you were already involved in an unusually large number of different jobs in your early adolescence.
That is true, and that has also run through my whole life. Consequently, I became a so-called all-rounder.
All-rounder?
Yes, but wait a minute. There must be something written in the computer that describes what that means. Wait, yes, here. You can read for yourself, because here it says all-rounder. Agile, versatile, interested male person who possesses and applies knowledge and skills in numerous fields.
That is also how my grandfather described you in his annals, though back then you were still.
Yes, back then I was still a boy, a greenhorn. But as for what they write here, that also exists in women, which is denied to them. But I have met women who were actually all-rounders. Our Figu women, for example, worked diligently to build the center, even using picks and shovels and digging trenches for electrical cables. Everything was really like that. But now I cannot avoid saying that I am constantly being asked about the future and what it will bring. I was asked again from Germany what will happen politically in America and also everywhere else. But I do not really want to say much about that because it would not be good. However, I can mention that there will be a huge political row in Germany in the near future, and the government will find itself in an unpleasant situation of partial disintegration. The parties are so divided among themselves that certain parties will be dissolved, and there will also be internal party intrigues that will cause disputes and the removal of governments. And as far as America is concerned, everything will turn out differently than the Democrats assume and hope, because the result of the election will be completely different and exactly the opposite of what the billions in donations for the election are working towards. The old will reassert itself and once again lead the government, although this will be less severe than what is hoped for. The new would trigger an unforeseen catastrophe that would have a malign effect worldwide, while the old will not cause this, but will still be evil. So it will come to pass that, and that is better for America and the whole world, for if this is to be said, and so it will unfortunately come to pass, as I have just seen and experienced together with Svath, that although the Democrats and also many in foreign states will then be shaken, what will come to pass will be the lesser evil, but will nevertheless be a heavy one. And various people in foreign states who are biased in favor of the worst side will mendaciously change their minds and suddenly be hypocritically good friends with the winning party. This, namely when
You should not publicize that.
I will just put dots there, because I am also somewhat adept at writing. I will say, even if it sounds megalomaniacal, as I have been since I was a teenager.
I am tempted to visit some of the places where you used to work with you, jumping back and forth in time, of course, so that I can witness or see what you experienced on the spot. In particular, I would like to know about the special features of your night watch work. And I'm also interested in your earlier work, when, in addition to your night watch work, you occasionally carried out money transports and personal security. I would also like to know how you washed gold tinsel out of a river, if that is possible. Another thing that interests me is how you swam across the lake from Fellenden to Greifensee on the opposite side and back again with just one arm, as you once told me. I would also like to see your piecework in building sewers and cleaning oil tanks, which you did independently. In fact, I would be able to get a real impression of how you led your life at work.
We can do that if you ever find the time. I will. Good, I am up for it any time. Just let me know when it is possible for you.
Some of the things you told me in our conversations, that you were there with my grandfather in times past, like at Lake Titicaca more than 3,000 years ago, then in the Far East, where the art island of Saranac.
But I cannot write that down when I recall our conversation. I have dots to make, because I promised Svath, back when we were rummaging through the past, that I would keep quiet about what really was. Our paleontologists, who deal scientifically with the animal world and other living creatures that moved independently, as well as with the plant world, but also the geologists with the rocks of the past ages of the earth, but also with the life of fauna and flora of prehistoric times, etc., I should not influence them by telling them what really was. This also applies to archaeologists and prehistorians, who deal almost exclusively with the legacies of Earthlings, because I should remain silent towards them and also not say anything to them, just as I should not say anything to paleontologists. One reason for this is that they want to know everything better anyway, and would accuse me of fantasizing or even lying. This was also proven when I told Glor, who I told you about, that Charles Darwin had based his theory of ape-human being evolution on a fraud. A great many archaeologists, prehistorians and paleontologists have got it into their heads that their professional beliefs, in addition to their religious ones, do not allow them to believe that reality and the whole effective truth was different from the way they present it through their assumptions and fantasies. The fact that there were life forms on Earth in its early fauna and flora that paleontologists cannot even imagine and fantasize does not even enter their heads. Because many believe that they have not only been shovel-fed the wisdom, but also the complete history of the fauna and flora of prehistoric times. Yet they do not even know, just like the evolutionary theorists, what the real course of Earth's history was, especially not the formation of the Earth and its living creatures. Because the claims consist only of assumptions and conjectures that are only partially true, as was also the case with the giant asteroid that triggered a world catastrophe millions of years earlier. Ancient and very ancient civilizations are also wrongly dated contrary to actual facts, and claims are attributed to them that are effectively made up out of thin air. The same applies to all genera and species of living beings. For in fact many things are largely misrepresented, just as living beings were also first created at certain times, or disappeared again because they became extinct, and so on. Also how the various genera, as earthlings call the sexes, of fauna and flora changed as a result of foreign intermingling, and how many different species emerged from this, whereby new faunas and floras were formed again and again over the course of time. That is to say, new animal forms as well as animal forms and self-propagating life forms. This is also how new plants developed, from the tiniest moss and the tiniest plant known today, which is much smaller than the pin-sized flowering plant dwarf water lily, for example, which is 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters in size, to the mightiest tree, today's giant sequoia Sequoiadendron giganteum, which can grow to a height of 130 or even 140 feet, 150 meters. The coast redwood Sequoia sempervirens, which grows in the Redwood National Park in the USA and reaches a height of 100 meters and more, is also worth mentioning. These are primeval sequoias that can still be found today. However, another prehistoric tree has also been found, namely the Wollemi tree. It still grows in a secret place in Australia, where around 100 trees can still be found. A secret location because it is feared that madmen might want to feast on the trees by stealing the seeds and getting rich by selling them, etc. The Wollemi tree, which can grow to a height of 15 to 20 meters, is an extremely rare species of conifer that was long thought to be extinct, and which formed entire forests around 100 million years ago. This primeval sequoia Metasequoia glyptostroboides is also known as Wollemia nobilis, Wollemi pine dinosaur plant. And what I also want to say is that the primitive technology that exists on Earth today, and to which Earthlings think that this technological mania is valuable for progress, only leads to human beings slowly but surely withering away and becoming stupid. In my opinion, the progress of technology, like all related things, has taken place far too quickly and too early, because it has created an unrivaled dependency for humanity, to which even small children are addicted, which later becomes so ausartung that it is no longer possible to live without the most modern things. All the futuristic things that have already emerged worldwide in this respect have been invented and spread around the world far too early.
You are quite correct in your judgment, because the whole of what exists today in terms of technology and all that is in use was anticipated in time, as well as the understanding of it by Earth humans, between 1,600 and 2,000 years ago, depending on what it is about. As a result, Earth humans are not yet able to deal with everything futuristically invented and handed out to them and their use and consumption in a rational and sensible wise, but only in forms that are no more than playful, neglectful, comfortable, spoilt, and lowly intelligent.
Only speak it out, namely that the whole thing is stultifying and stupefying, as also that it leads to poverty of movement, comfort, carelessness, laziness, and to disinterestedness, etc. The same also happens with independent thinking, which is sinking more and more into belief in a higher might, and thus in an imaginary God. For on the one hand, many leave the churches and distance themselves from them. Consequently, the number of believers in the churches, temples, mosques, and other houses of prayer dwindles drastically. Although those who depart from these places of faith remain believers and continue to believe in their imaginary deity. Just as Christians believe in Jesus Christ or the Savior alongside God the Father, believers in Islam believe in Allah, Jews in Elohim, Zoroastrians in Ahura Mazda, Voodoo believers in Bondi and Mawulisa, Hindu believers in Brahma, Daksha, Hiranyagarbha and Indira, etc., Maori believers in Rangi, Baha'i believers in Ule, and so on. So the delusion of belief in God still remains and increases. Even if, for example, in Christianity, hundreds of thousands leave their churches and other places of worship, as well as groups and associations, etc., every year. In addition, believers in God are replenished by descendants. So despite the decrease in the number of believers in places of worship, there is an increase again. And this results, especially in Christianity, in the fact that at certain times, such as Christmas, Easter and All Saints' Day in particular, vibrations of faith spread very blatantly around the whole world, which are stronger than any vibration of electricity, and have a strong negative influence on human beings in such a way that they, without knowing why or where from, become confused and unpleasant, alienated from perception, inattentive and aggressive, etc., and also react in this way. This is particularly pronounced in Christianity, because at these times an enormous number of prayers are sent to heaven, especially by Catholics, because they are more deeply anchored in the religious delusion of faith than those who believe in Protestantism. Of course, the same also occurs with other religions and their special religious days, but these do not have such a harmful and influential impact on human beings because they are few or fewer in number. According to your Playaran's most accurate research, this list shows that the number of believers in Christianity is 2.578 billion, believers in Islam 1.636 billion, with the number of the delusional believers in this religion growing very rapidly as a result of state support. Hinduism has 1,262,009,009 followers, and Buddhism, as I see from the list here that Bermunda brought me yesterday, has 348,203,004 followers. This, while Zarathustra or Zoroastrianism has just 29,416,001, as shown here on this list.
That will be so, because Bermunda is very accurate with her data.
To what extent all the believers of these religions and their numerous sects, which probably number in the hundreds or even thousands, now count as fanatics? I am, of course, not in a position to judge, but according to Bermunda, it has been ascertained that America is the worst country on earth in terms of religious fanaticism and fanatical religious sects. This, as well as in terms of racism and the numerous criminal organizations, but also in terms of murderous criminal organizations, some of which even give themselves the guise of Christian religion. But committing dastardly murders is common. For example, the racist organization of the Ku Klux Klan is also still up to mischief, as are various right-wing extremists, who not only form groups but also organizations and also carry out their mischief, which can even lead to murder, with flags bearing swastikas being used. But now I have strayed very far from what I wanted to say. In addition to everything I have already said, it should also be said that the same kind of idiots are also at work in the government in Germany as everywhere else, only in a different wise, namely all those who enforce their primitive, lowly intelligent neo-Nazi mentality alongside the righteous in the government. American listeners, Zelensky supporters and Netanyahu fanatics, as well as imbeciles and the stupid who are in bondage to these war criminals, who supply Zelensky with weapons and money so that his warriors, who are probably no better than he is, can continue to murder and spread misery and destruction, etc. And the fact that people are complaining that military personnel from North Korea will soon be appearing on the Russian side against Zelensky. After all, it is he who is fanatically waging war, is more than just partisan idiocy. Because the fact that Zelensky has so many foreign military personnel fighting against the Russians, even Russian traitors, as well as the Swiss, etc., is not being complained about, but the war fanatic and warmonger Zelensky is still being cheered to the heavens. So there is partisan grumbling, and different measures are used depending on the partisanship. However, I would like to express my thoughts on the whole of what you have said, which I do not want to reproduce in writing. As you also think, and I should put dots, especially with regard to the four main ones, which in my opinion, are unscrupulous warmongers, and as such are currently to be named. These are Putin, Netanyahu, Zelensky, and Erdogan, whereby I see the mass murderer Netanyahu as the worst war criminal of all, equal to Adolf Hitler and his henchmen, and not outshining him and his henchmen. Of course, Hamas and Hezbollah should also be mentioned, because the whole thing is also an unrivaled society of murderers, and this cannot really be overlooked. Admittedly, there is also a lot going on with Persia, where the religious misrule will take revenge for this and that, as is apparently inevitable for religious fanatics. Those from Yemen should also be mentioned, because they are also making a stink, and as far as I know, the war-addicted and hegemonistic Americans are already behind them. But if I now compare Netanyahu with Putin's actions, then the Russian, as a still halfway normal Russian war leader, comes off much better than the obviously completely evil and deviant Israeli Netanyahu. Not to mention the fact that the Turk Erdogan looks like a lowly, intelligent, and vindictive schoolboy with his bombings against the PKK in Syria and Iraq. Although Netanyahu is also at war in Syria, bombing Damascus and having his army of murderers shoot at and blow up cars in the streets. The guy can and may murder, destroy and do what he wants, like America, its president and army with weapons, etc. Which and whatever else he receives from America and Germany, or from the neo-Nazi rulers, as well as I have already said, from America and its approval for all war crimes. This, along with other aid, without any correct or even any intervention. Only half-heartedly do some media make themselves heard here and there, but nothing is done to put an end to the malicious and murderous activities of the mass murderer Netanyahu. And the fact that Jordan and Iraq simply accept that Netanyahu is abusing their airspace to send missiles and planes through it to Persia and Iran, respectively, will also not be so easily accepted in the end, I think. Well, the clown begging for weapons, money and NATO membership worldwide, and the evil war fanatic Zelensky in Ukraine is far behind Netanyahu, who is trying to mercilessly realize his genocidal mania through the Israeli military against Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hezbollah in Lebanon in an absolutely mass murderous and really completely irresponsible, ruthless, dehumanizing, and merciless manner. In doing so, he has once again triggered the vicious anti-Semitism that has flattened somewhat since the last World War, just like the clown Zelensky in Ukraine, who as a Jew reignited hatred against the Jewish people worldwide. The fact that he is being helped by idiots and other lunatics and partisans with arms, supplies, and money, etc., is as much a sign of low intelligence as the Swiss idiots who are making a mockery of the time-honored neutrality and making Switzerland vulnerable to attack with their insane actions and thoughtless behavior. This, for example, by idiotically adopting sanctions from the EU dictatorship and applying them against Russia, as well as also postponing the delivery of material to the Swiss army in order to be able to deliver weapons to Zelensky first, material that the Swiss army should actually receive. In my opinion, however, the Swiss army would also only commit murder without hesitation if it were called upon to do so, because war is murder in any case. But treasonous acts are carried out from the federal palace in Bern by persons who sit in the federal palace as federal councillors, where they do not belong. The fact that such elements are elected to government at all is proof that the persons who elect such treacherous subjects are no better off and have absolutely no knowledge of human nature, but in their stupidity have only a big mouth and shabbily and shamefully exercise their might. This also applies to elements who irresponsibly want to stifle species diversity or biodiversity, even though this is vital for human beings and all fauna and flora, and is therefore so dependent on it that nothing natural can exist without it. How stupid and lowly intelligent, that is to say, foolish and silly as well as non-thinking, a human being must be who also wants to disadvantage or even stifle the extensive vital biodiversity for all life in order to build senseless and irrational motorways and other nonsensical things. This, instead of doing something sensible to drastically reduce the all-destructive overpopulation. such as through sensible education in the sense that a worldwide and multi-year birth freeze is to be followed, that humanity is to be reduced. The human beings should be reduced to just 500 million. The planet and nature should be able to recover and regenerate. The fauna should be able to live and move freely again without idiotic territorial restrictions, and the flora should be able to flourish all around again. In addition to everything else, this means that the atmosphere can be detoxified and the climate can return to normal. But the fact that a federal councilor of all people opposes this and wants wolves, beavers and other animals and creatures to be shot is effectively more than just idiotic. And the fact that such completely irresponsible elements are in the federal council at all is more than just regrettable and worrying. This is just as wise as traitorous elements can also carry out their criminal activities from the federal palace without being called to account. Just as those who treacherously collude with the EU dictatorship and treacherously sell Switzerland to it cannot. That is what I have to say and also see, namely things and behavior and efforts that are completely directed against Switzerland, its peace and freedom and Swiss neutrality. Now, the fact that the Swiss government is also seriously violating the country's neutrality and making a mockery of it, for example by adopting sanctions from the EU dictatorship and applying them against Russia, is a bombshell. This, as well as the other ways in which neutrality is recklessly violated and made a pig of, also in such a way that millions of Swiss francs are senselessly wasted, as well as in order to interfere in the war in Ukraine, for example by clearing mines in Ukrainian territory, precisely through Switzerland's interference and expenditure of money. This has nothing to do with neutrality, but effectively with destroying it through treason. Those in the Federal Council should think carefully about this, because this kind of action is contrary to neutrality, which prohibits it, because it is interference in foreign acts of war and has absolutely nothing to do with humanitarian aid. Such action is always a breach of neutrality and therefore interference in acts of war and cannot be brushed aside with the lie of alleged humanitarian aid. Aid can only be justified if war refugees are taken in and given protection or medical assistance. Any activity or aid, etc., can and may only be carried out in a country at war, while maintaining neutrality, once the acts of war have ended, and humanitarian aid is then genuinely provided. Such acts of interference, however, as have recently been irresponsibly carried out by Switzerland and its government, are reprehensible and clearly nothing other than partisan and a betrayal of true neutrality in the country, the homeland. The whole thing is not only a violation of neutrality, but also effectively makes Switzerland vulnerable if it is acted against in any wise. Switzerland has already been rejected by Russia and other states as a negotiating venue and partner for peace talks, but this apparently does not bother those culpable idiots and traitors to neutrality, and those who do not think and have no conscience in the government, although traitors to their country and their lack of conscience. Irresponsibility and ability to think are apparently unable to do so. This promotes exactly what I saw together with Svath, and then wrote the poem in 1950 that you photographed for me from Svath's annals, and brought to me on the 18th of October, which I now want to insert here during our conversation.
The time of doom comes in the third millennium.
In the third millennium, destruction comes over all earthly life, for the tormented blue planet will tremble in its very core, as foretold very clear and true in other predictions, for the human beings of the earth in their actions will become so ungrateful, and, through population numbers in excess, wickedly destroys everything. The planet, its nature, and its fauna and flora so outrageously, and through all their actions so madly and enormously, that much of life will die or be endangered, in fact, permanently. In Switzerland, incapable leaders will come out in the open. Thus, the country's neutrality will be abused, and will expire, through stupidity as well as incompetent and irresponsible morons who lack true thinking and are nothing more than neutrality killers. All will come from the confused madness of this world's human beings, whose war cries loudly shrills everywhere in the third millennium. Humans of Earth, you provoke what's to come, and so it will unfold, that in the future, all the violent ruin will viciously roll over you. And it will be so because you will not turn to the truth. So, in blindness, you steadily contemplate religion, lies and politics, and through this you have let yourselves be driven to greed and craving for power. Therefore, hatred, falsehood, addiction, and lust to kill could get a grip on you. Through religion and politics, you have very lousily been exploited, were betrayed, and developed to a stupid bearer of sorrows. Earth humans, you shift all of your responsibilities to your God, faithful to all old false doctrines of all delusional religions hoarding. But mind henceforward, Earth humans, human beings of the beautiful Earth. When cries of death, evil, and ruin shrill over the planet, you absolutely alone will bear the full weight of the responsibility, for never you may consult a loving God for your erroneous acting. You alone are responsible for all the evil occurrences, for never will a god, an angel, or a pope be on hand with help. They are here only to betray you, and to viciously exploit you, to sound a bell for enslavement of thoughts, of delusion and evil ruin. You, Earth humans of the blue planet in this solar system, yourselves are closest to the truth and doing right, also legally. Therefore, fully align yourself with truth alone, or else much more damage and misery, hardship and pain will come over you. Still, much of the looming negative you may keep away from you, if you strive to act truly good and righteously. But for that, you must part from religions and politics, or otherwise your bones will bleach in the sun's fierce heat. Soon some things will happen come true before the next millennium start, but the great rest will follow and strike the descendants. AD 1117 Chars, Monday the 6th. February 1950.
In addition to this poem from 1950, I wrote the following a few days ago, on the 20th of October, which I would also like to read to you here during our conversation. It is not much, but I think I should say or write a few words, because the longer it goes on, the more it becomes necessary to say what is needed and what is tangible. The way I see it, human beings on Earth are becoming more and more numb to what is happening around the world, so that the ongoing wars in Ukraine and the Middle East are simply accepted with indifference, and the warring scoundrels and all their murderous armies are still hailed like saints, especially when they belong to certain religions and are fanatically devoted to them, and these are played to the fore. This, as is being done by America's government, where, by the way, it will seem like a miracle that in the upcoming leadership elections to be decided in November, the lesser evil of the masculine will get its due, while the much more evil of the feminine will be put in its place, which would cause and trigger unimagined disasters, as a future observation with Svath pointed out.
From my grandfather's annals, I am aware that the new presidency, as you said a few days ago, will not be the yellow of the egg, and under certain circumstances the whole life of the world will be threatened, and even by a state leadership, namely when the wrong of—
Yes, I know that, because with Svath was—
That is also written, so you are aware of everything.
I am.
Then there is nothing more to be said.
That will indeed also be in come, as Svath and I have seen. But listen to what I want to read to you here, about what I have written about the future, because I cannot avoid saying what I have written here.
Freedom, peace, and independent thinking instead of faith.
Peace, freedom, not faith, but independent thinking, which currently sounds like a utopia in October 2024 and will continue to do so long into the third millennium, unfortunately sounds more than just negative at the moment and will probably remain so for a very long time to come. At least, unless all those responsible and governments on Earth, as well as their supporters and all Earth humans of both sexes as a whole, finally make a serious effort to learn understanding and reason, wisdom and modesty in order to become truly wise human beings and peaceful. This would, however, require that every human being finally begins to think independently and clearly, without any religious or worldly delusions, and is also effectively able to do so. for this alone, as well as without any selfish or other kind of preconditions, would also allow them to fully and willingly place themselves in the directions that are reasonably devised by wise human beings around the world, and how these shape and release their valuable attitude. And human beings who follow what is valuable would lead humanity on earth to true freedom and lasting peace, just as the evil and destructive machinations of overpopulation would also cease. Machinations that are destroying, eradicating, and destroying the entire Earth planet, as well as nature and its entire fauna and flora. Overpopulation is the greatest evil of all, because its machinations are destroying everything that is vital to all living things. From the lowest moss and blade of grass to the giant tree, from the smallest to the largest life form, the elephant, but especially human beings. Planet Earth, together with its entire creation, nature, and its fauna and flora, should be respected, honored, and appreciated by Earth humans. So they should no longer listen to the idiots who, on the one hand, are being straw stupid, and, on the other, completely without conscience and scrounge for offspring to increase births. Believers are cajoled by saints to promote offspring for monetary gain, such as the Pope who urges his Catholics to create more offspring so he can rake in the cash. This, like the unrighteous part of those in power who demand ever higher taxes and then squander them pointlessly. Such irresponsible rabble of elements of those in power, from which all righteous rulers are of course excluded, scrounge for more and more offspring in order to collect more taxes, as well as to gain enough cannon fodder for wars when they unscrupulously bring death, manslaughter, misery, and destruction upon the world and humanity. And that part of the completely irresponsible rulers is also not afraid of lying, deceitful and partisan support for criminal leaders of foreign states and their shameful and inhumane war crimes, as well as committing treason against their own country, against which the entire people cannot even do anything because they are simply denied the right to do so. Such evil, idiotic and blasphemous demands, which promote overpopulation all the more excessively and rapidly and destroy everything of the planet, nature and its fauna and flora, even prevent correct instructions, which are also disseminated worldwide by the Figu, that should urgently be thought through and followed. That everything destructive and, first and foremost, overpopulation should be stopped and the planet, nature, and its entire fauna and flora should be protected. Nature and its entire fauna and flora would be brought back into order. If this were to happen, then the Earth's climate, which has been adversely affected by Earth humans, bringing many evils, destruction, and countless deaths and destruction, and which has turned evil, would be able to fulfill its usefulness. However, as it has been and continues to be adversely affected by the Earthling, it has already reached the point where climate change and the associated heat and warmth have rendered many faunal life forms, large and small, incapable of absorbing and neutralizing the emissions of CO2 and other toxic gases, with the result that the Earth's atmosphere is becoming more and more poisoned. This has already spread not only to lower plants, but even to the tree forests, as a result of which diseases are also increasing and intensifying among humanity, as pathogens from foreign lands are invading, which in earlier times only appeared in foreign countries. The human beings are also becoming more and more stupid in their behavior, are becoming increasingly lowly intelligent, and therefore more non-thinking. Now, if we finally realized and did the correct thing, true peace and freedom would emerge on planet Earth within a few decades. However, this would require that only righteous and honest rulers get into positions of responsibility, but not elementary gossip, which is being straw stupid and only greedy for power, as is unfortunately the case in practically all states on Earth at the moment, with a few exceptions. This concerns elements that are in government and also, and I want to say this again, being straw stupid and completely incapable of thinking about the future. as a result of which they cannot prevent many evils from occurring and cannot be avoided. Healthy, responsible foresight, guided by understanding and reason, would make it possible to recognize what could happen in the future before a disaster could also be announced and actually occur. But at the moment, it is absolutely only a pipe dream that such government elements are not at the helm, because if everything is considered worldwide, then there are masses of government idiots at work. Worldwide, as I have just said, against whom all the righteous of the governments have no and not the slightest chance of ordering and doing the correct thing. Unfortunately, the righteous of the people will also be powerless against it in the future, because the majority of the population remains blind to reality and its truth, and consequently howls along with the unrighteous of the governments. Apart from the fact that the unrighteous of those in power commit treason in a rather nasty way and messing up their own people and the security of their own state, such useless elements are also the ones who, without consulting the people and without allowing them to vote on the matter, are flushing taxpayers' money down the drain in order to provide partisan war aid to foreign states and also supply them with deadly weapons and money, etc. All life on the planet, human beings, nature, and all fauna and flora would flourish and be worth living again. And all annihilation, extinction, and destruction caused by the machinations of overpopulation would be ended if the right action were taken. It would effectively have the effect of allowing the planet and nature, as well as its fauna and flora, to recover, regenerate and rebuild, and the rampant spread of various diseases would also be put in check. Everything would put an end to the murderous wars, all related murder, destruction and annihilation, as well as the malicious extermination of fauna and flora, the destruction of nature and the planet, and the poisoning of the atmosphere, and the impairment of the climate. In addition to all this, human beings' minds and reason would be stimulated in such a way that the overpopulation, which is destroying everything through their machinations, would be rigorously brought to a valuable, normal, and planet-friendly level through a worldwide and controlled stop to births. But the Pope wants to prevent this just as much as idiotic rulers, because the saint in Rome, like government idiots call on the populations, urges his Catholics to produce more offspring, probably so that more money flows into the Vatican again, just as the government idiots also tend towards more taxes and cannon fodder for wars. If the masses of humanity could finally get away from the religious delusion of go and multiply, all human beings would realize that it is not false and miserable religious instructions that need to be followed, but that independent thinking, a lively mind, and clear reason are what human beings, all life, nature, fauna and flora, and the earth need. Earth needs. And it would become clear to human beings that it is not any belief, no god or angel, etc., but only the human being alone, and he himself and is independent, rational and reasonable, clear, true, genuine and free thinking, decision-making and acting, without any religious or worldly belief that can bring everything back into correct balance. In other words, as it has been since the beginning of creation, before human beings fell into their delusions of grandeur, that they were rulers over all things, and even life and death, and even creation itself. Creation is, and I must explain this clearly and distinctly, for which the time has only just come, truly nothing other than pure nature throughout the universe. All existence in general, the all-encompassing existence of everything tangible and also everything intangible. It is the natural energy and power of all that exists, and this energy and power is predetermined in all life of all living things, that is to say, according to earthly knowledge in supposedly indivisible tiny quarks, bosons, protons, leptons, and electrons. But this is truthfully not the conclusion of wisdom, in all the largest and tiniest things that human beings on Earth are not yet capable of exploring. Creation is fundamentally the energy and power, and thus the true existence of all things tangible and intangible, and as such creation is not an entity God, angel, son of God, Lord, Elohim, Almighty, Jehovah, Yahweh, Comforter, Anna, World Ruler, El Roy, Savior, Adonai, Holy Spirit, Jesus, Abba, that is to say Father, Theos, Kyrios, Trinity, Eloah, eternal, or any other form of a being capable of thinking, reasoning, sealing, sensing, deciding, punishing, judging, etc. Creation is pure vitalizing energy and power of everything and everyone that is material and therefore tangible, but also intangible, as well as energy and power of everything non-material, immaterial, and intangible, as well as energy, gravity, information, etc. The creation is pure working energy and power, which provides everything and every living vesin according to its genus or species with life energy and life force, every self-propelling life form, human beings, animals, creatures and other life forms of fauna and flora of all genera and species in general, as well as every giant tree, every micro-small moss formation and quark, the planet, its rocks, water, rocks, mountains, the atmosphere, the climate, and everything that exists. Creation animates everything and anything, with life energy and power, for as long as it is able to exist or live according to its genus or species. This applies from the giant tree down to the tiniest blade of grass and moss and curd, etc., in the pure working of creation, in its existence of comprehensive nature in the entire universe. No thought finds an origin, but only an evolutionary, natural, and incessant and absolutely neutral, working in every wise and kind. So there is also no good or bad, no good or evil, because creation as the nature and all-encompassing existence of everything and everyone throughout the universe is eternal and, so to speak, eternal and absolutely neutral and balanced. And if negative, bad, degenerate and evil, etc., arise, then such unvalues cannot arise through creation, but only through the wises of thinking, wises of feeling, wises of perceiving, wises of fine spiritual perception, instincts and various other impulsations, and wises of behavior, etc., of life forms. This is the case with human beings, animals and creatures, and with life forms of all genera and species in general. And it is precisely with regard to these that I have realized that the majority of Earth humans do not know the difference between genus and species, just as in writings and the media there is only talk of species, even though the animals referred to are animals, creatures, or self-propelled life forms, and plants are basically effective genera and not simply species, as is erroneously claimed, because even the fair sciences, which are so highly exalted by earthlings, but are truly not wisdom itself, are not so clever that they would teach Earth humans what is right, namely, that genus is not simply gender. On Earth, scientists and earthlings in general obviously do not know the reality and its truth. For example, that animals are without exception mammals, alongside which there are also creatures and millions of species of self-propelling life forms, as well as millions of species of plants. Earth humans obviously do not know the difference between genus and species due to low intelligence or ignorance, or the difference has never been explained to them. The only correct thing would be, as is natural among the Pleiaren and has been taught since childhood, and as was taught to me by Svarth, that the entire fauna and flora are not simply to be described and named as species, as is the case in the very primitive knowledge and linguistic usage of Earth humans. Thus, the plausible explanatory teaching of Svarth, as also of the Pleiaren as a whole, was that the earthly relationships of definitions and descriptions, as well as names, etc., of things given, existing, and realities, etc., are extremely primitive and absolutely inadequate. This is especially true with regard to fauna and flora, which have always been limited to animals and plants. The correctness, however, according to Svarth and the Pleiaran, would be that the fauna is to be named according to what it really and truly embodies, namely animals, creatures and self-propelled life forms that are to be named by their names, such as snake, beetle, mosquito, fish, bird, chicken or lizard, etc. In the case of flora, these are plants, such as trees, grass, flowers, algae, shrubs, etc. But in this respect, the earthly sciences and their practitioners are obviously not educated enough to understand this, and would therefore call everything by its species form, according to its genus and species. As for the fact that even fair science apparently does not know that all life forms are to be specifically determined according to their genus and species, they apparently do not even have a clue. Nor do they realize that, in terms of genus, the three generic differences spoon or masculine genus as the masculine gender, in short, masculine, as well as fork or feminine genus as the feminine gender, feminine, are not meant and should not be understood, nor the neutral genus, knife, the neuter gender, neuter. In the sense of genus and species, therefore, it is not the feminine gender feminine, the woman, the jug, the fork, the flower, or the masculine gender masculine, the man, the yard, the moon, or neuter gender neuter, that is being addressed, because, according to the Pleiaran explanation, sexual genus does not correctly refer to the characteristic of sexual gender, but rather, according to earthly usage, to genus. This would be, according to Pleiaran's teaching, the actual term and the effectively correct term for the term genus, which is wrongly used by Earth humans, because this word means and says exactly what it effectively is, namely that a certain genus is, for example, that is to say female, but another genus is that is to say male. There is also the genus hermaphrodite, living beings, thus human beings, that are both male and female according to their sexual characteristics and traits. Life forms, therefore also human beings, if they do not correspond to one species, that is to say crosses of foreign main genus forms, but main genera that are the same, are absolutely always same directional, which means that an extension or offspring will develop or form in the same direction from which it emerges or is born. Something that is absolutely not the case when the main genus form is mated by another, and foreign main genus form. Consequently, this then corresponds to another form that emerges and is born, namely a species that inevitably only partially corresponds to the main genus form that emerges through a cross. It is therefore clear that, according to the female genus form, the offspring is formed and shaped according to the main genus as a result of mating by a male genus form. If, however, cross-mating takes place, namely by a second main genus or a foreign main genus, then a new life form or an subspecies is formed from this, which emerges or is born as an independent species. These are called species by the Pleiaran, in contrast to the main genus, while Earth humans call such mixed beings hybrids. But this is a completely wrong and misleading term, because hybrid does not mean that it is a mixed being of two fundamentally different and therefore foreign main genera. Because the earthly term hybrid has always meant arrogance, presumption, arrogance, and has nothing to do with genus diversity and species diversity. This is also proven by the primitiveness of earthly languages, through which false word values are used that do not say what is really meant. Species that arise as a result of crossbreeding, that is to say, through different foreign main genera, give rise to life forms that are called species, because they are composed of differences of main genera and thus of two different main genus origins, and are therefore mixed and thus crossbred. Such species are, depending on the case, infertile or partly fertile, so that not all species, but only some of them, are capable of mating, whereby it is even less certain that species capable of reproduction will develop. Growths, outgrowths and diseases of all kinds, etc., in nature, in plants of the fauna and flora, and therefore also in human beings, are not caused by the work of creation, but by circumstances that arise, which normally result from some kind of development of environmental influences. Such environmental influences are physical and completely naturally developing chemical or biological factors that affect and infest completely natural systems and have an impact on organic conditions, thus exerting a harmful environmental influence. The human being and the entire fauna, as well as the all-encompassing flora, is subject to the possibility that, for example, a proliferation or disease may spread, that spores and germs may spread through the wind, or that such germs may spread contagiously and also trigger a rampantly spreading disease or pandemic. However, this does not happen through the fault of creation, but through the circumstances of life, its conditions, the carelessness of human beings and the fauna and flora, which have their own forms of language and means of communication, contrary to the open knowledge of human beings. This, as they are constantly changing over the course of time, changing their physical appearance and their means of communication, as will happen to human beings, who will change anatomically over the next 200 years, so that a discrepancy to today's appearance, especially facially, will occur due to a certain change. The views and knowledge of human beings will also change significantly, which today are still characterized by delusional belief in religions and sectarianism, leading to a lack of education and knowledge, and a tendency for the majority of humanity to slowly but surely become stupid. This also means that countless human beings greedily keep themselves afloat with war, Orsatong, crime and criminality, power, violence, wealth, and all kinds of deviant airs and graces, etc., and slowly but surely wither away. The religions have done their work and continue to do so, because the believers cling to the erroneous belief that a God gives and controls everything, and they think that this imaginary God is eternal in the sense that he is timeless. This is in contrast to today's more real philosophy of the somewhat more rational philosophers, who are of the prevailing opinion that God is temporal, that is to say, only for a certain period of belief of the delusional believers. The believers in God, however, believe that God is of an eternal nature, and even more eternal than just eternal and completely timeless. They just believe completely thoughtlessly that God never came into being, but has always been and will never cease to exist, but he truly only exists within the time of the delusional thinkers, who have no self-respect whatsoever, and shift this respect onto their imaginary God. Now, when Christianity is considered, it is the second oldest of the three main religions in existence, and has been misleading countless earthlings for just over 2,000 years, and is currently probably the most widespread religion on earth. It is based on Judaism, because Emmanuel, who is falsely called Jesus, was a native Jew who, however, renounced this religion, and therefore, and also as a result of spreading the teaching, fell out of favor. But there is also the youngest of the three monotheistic religions, namely Islam, which is based on and builds on the Christianity and Judaism that emerged and came into being around 600 years after Emmanuel, starting from a completely falsified false doctrine, which Emmanuel never brought and also never taught, and which is truthfully nothing other than a continuation and also a falsification of the Christianity that emerged and was falsified. In Islam, God is called Allah, and if all the names for God mentioned in the Holy Quran are added together, the result is a number that exceeds 100. Various lists show 99 such names, some of which differ wildly from one another. However, according to the Islamic view, the 100th name of God is unpronounceable and unknown to human beings, and many believers in Islam do not even know about this fact. If we now look at the religions of India as a whole, it can be said that they do not have a founder, as is the case with Christianity, allegedly through the imaginary Jesus Christ, and with Islam through Muhammad ibn Abd Allah. Instead, however, there are around 330 million gods and goddesses, as well as countless seers and saints, whereby the dense network of religious and philosophical currents has developed over the past 4,000 years or so. The believers of Indian religions, mainly Hinduism, believe that there is one main god, namely Brahman, and that the other gods, depending on the case, have these and those different aspects of the main god Brahman. Various Hindu believers assume that many of the other gods are completely independent of the main god Brahman. Most Hindu gods are depicted figuratively or as sculptures, with many having multiple heads and hands, signifying that these gods would have extreme might and abilities. What else is interesting to know is that the root word of God can be found in the Germanic area, in the root word Gouda, which was used by the Germanic tribes for both male and female deities. Christian believers crazily assume that God is simultaneously Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which they call the Trinity in their delusion. They also need the term Father, by which they believingly mean a completely imaginary creator of all living beings and things. Christians believe that God has no parents, at least not in the literal sense. God, they believe, is eternal, and for this reason alone cannot have parents or any ancestors. God, Christians believe, was therefore not created by a person, nor by anything or other, for he is said to have always been, and also without having created himself. However, he, but not human beings, is said to have created time, and since human beings on earth live in the dimension of time, reason and reason alone demand that all things that exist have a beginning and an end. However, Christian believers believe that this does not apply to God, because he lives outside of space and time, and therefore outside of any dimension. But this begs the question of how something can exist if there is no dimension. In the beginning, it is claimed, God is said to have created heaven and earth, and hell. And before that, there was supposed to have been madness and confusion and darkness. At any rate, this is how it is famously written in the Christian book of Genesis in the Old Testament. Even thousands of years ago, human beings crazily thought that God was eternal, in the sense that he himself was timeless, or that his existence was timeless. Today, however, certain human beings think somewhat more reasonably, but still delusionally, that God is temporal and thus transient with time. His eternal nature is therefore seen as non-eternal and therefore timeless, although the timeless is indable in the human sense and can find a new beginning again. Christians, believers in Judaism, and also believers in Islam as monotheists assume that God has no age and has always been God, without having been created or having created himself in any way. The holy scriptures of all religions claim that God exists as creator from eternity to eternity, and that God has no beginning and no end. In the beginning, there was only chaos. And the first God was rather just a spirit who gave his daughter Gaia the earth, and her son Uranus the heavens, and that they had many children, including the Titans, the first real gods. The most important Titans were Kronos and Rhea, who also had many children. Finally, there is Buddhism, a religion that has around 200 to 500 million followers worldwide, and is therefore the fourth largest religion. The current spread of the false doctrine of rebirth can basically be traced back to this religion, although it has been referred to as re-existence, or becoming again, or renewed existence since time immemorial. In the Buddhist context, the term is taken from Indian philosophy and was in use long before the birth of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. The term rebirth was already known and used in the Vedic language. Buddha simply adopted it and adapted it to his own ideas and realizations. However, it must be clearly explained here, which was previously concealed due to necessity, because the time did not yet allow for enlightenment, and this is only now becoming the case, that Buddha was halfway on the correct line of understanding, namely that a new birth and existence does not take place after the death of the human being, but that the creation life energy that revitalizes him gives life to a new consciousness, and thus a completely new personality. However, Buddha understood rebirth very well, namely that the human being is not reborn as such, and the same person again after reincarnation or death, so that he by no means misunderstood rebirth to mean that the human being's soul should be reborn, as this was understood in other religious traditions, and is also still misunderstood today by believers in religions or believers in rebirth with regard to rebirth or reincarnation, which actually basically simply means reincarnation or reincarnation. Buddha understood rebirth or reincarnation to mean a new emergence of a new consciousness or a new personality, a new human being, that is to say, a new process of an absolutely new existence. However, as he was never able to express this correctly in language due to his weak linguistic formation and knowledge of the language, and was therefore also not educated enough in this respect, and therefore also not able to explain in detail what would actually have been necessary to explain, he used the wrong term rebirth. Moreover, in Buddha's time, the terms that are commonplace today did not yet exist, which have emerged very well as explanatory terms as a result of the advanced comprehensive knowledge and language development up to the present day. Different Buddhist teachings, which misinterpret and misteach rebirth after rebirth, unfortunately also exist, because evil falsifications of the teaching have also arisen in Buddhism, as is also the case in all other religions. The teaching that Buddha brought was falsified in the same way as the teachings of Emmanuel and Muhammad, and consequently a confusion has arisen, which, as in Christianity and Islam, has given rise to various sects and faiths that no longer contain anything of the reality and truth of the original teaching. Although believers in Buddhism worship Buddha as the enlightened one, they do not worship him as God. Although there are also various gods in certain branches of Buddhism, but these do not play a major role in the beliefs of Buddhists and actually have nothing to do with Buddha's teachings. Nonetheless, Buddhism is a religion that contains very serious falsifications throughout, as a very large number of idiotic and absolutely unforgivable belief factors have been fabricated from it. Reality and the irrefutable truth therein states that rules must be observed and adhered to in order for human beings to be true human beings. And these are so diverse that a whole and large work could be written about them. As an example, here are just 14 important points, of which there are thousands of them, which are also very valuable in terms of becoming true humanity, but which have nothing to do with religious aspirations and the like in any wise. 1. No living beings should be killed or harmed, which was originally taught thousands of years ago that neither human beings, animals, creatures and other self-moving creatures, nor plants should be harmed. According to a clear understanding, this can be understood to mean that neither human beings nor fauna and flora should be harmed or killed, and that wars, terror, revenge, retribution and murder, etc., should also not be carried out. 2. Nothing shall be taken which is stolen or otherwise unjustly taken or acquired, and therefore shall not be stolen. 3. The human being may exercise understanding and reason. He shall not do anything unlawful, nor engage in sexually unwholesome relationships, so also not commit adultery and not practice fornication and pedophilia. 4. The human being shall not seek his neighbor's wife, husband or goods, nor his life or well-being, nor shall he diminish his neighbor's honor and dignity, nor deny his neighbor's righteousness, nor place insurmountable obstacles in his way. 5. The human being should exercise his senses in right behavior, Consequently, he should think for himself and not believe. Moreover, he should do what is right and be honest. 6. The human being should not lie and not speak unwholesomely. And he should not lie, but always tell the truth. Never bear false witness, just as he should, but also never insult his neighbor, and thus not speak evil and blasphemously about fellow human beings, etc. 7. The human being develops himself, becomes pure and shapes his inner world, if he does what is right and therefore does not need to shun anyone. 8. The human being honors and protects his mother, his father, and all human beings, as well as nature and all living beings of every kind and species, to the best of his ability and capacity. And the human being should cultivate his thoughts and feelings and mold his inner being and become a true human being. But for this, he should learn and become knowledgeable and wise. 10. The human being shall attain purity and strive for perfection. And for this, he shall learn to manage all his impulses correctly, and he shall learn everything correctly in every respect, and become wise and compassionate. 11. Let the human being be attentive at all times to peace, freedom, charity, kindness, helpfulness, warm-heartedness, and affection. 12. The human being should be attentive at all times, but never succumb to indifference. 13. The human being should never do injustice, revenge, and retaliation in equal measure when injustice is done to him. 14. The human being should not be a slave of faith, but a knower and wise man of reality and truth. If the center, teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life is considered and taught, then this is aimed at ensuring that the human being lives, leads, and aligns his life according to reality and its truth through his learning and knowledge. He can achieve this with the help of meditation, which is important and meaningful to him. If he can organize and cultivate his thoughts in peace and quiet through meditation, far from any belief and dependence, also free from any external influences and free from any disturbing impulses, the human being can go into himself through meditation and find peace, as well as also find and arrive at true realizations of reality and truth. The way and value of mutual respect among all human beings in general can also be found through this, as well as being completely free from intoxicating substances such as alcohol and drugs, etc., through true meditation, if the human being really endeavors to do so and organizes his thinking, and thus his thoughts in a restful way. It results that woman and man are placed in equal value and without distinction. Through meditation, the human being illuminates himself and is his own light within himself, as well as for his knowledge, wisdom, and lifelong personal evolution. Human beings, and no other entity, are conscientiously responsible for honestly repairing the damage done to the planet and its nature creation, and making life worth living again for human beings. The planet, species diversity, and thus also the whole of nature and its fauna and flora. This will only happen very slowly if the necessary action is finally taken before it is too late, which can now be very quickly if the correct action is not taken. The human beings of Earth should realize this, especially those who are in leading positions in governments, and who may get hold of these lines and read them with an open mind and think about them intensively in order to make everything clear to themselves. Then, when this is done, all human beings who are in a position to do so should for once really seriously think up something useful and make truly valuable decisions, which are then also effectively translated into reality through corresponding action. Billy, 938 ER, 20th October 2024.
This is very good what you have written here, and moreover it is very enlightening. I am also referring to everything that Bernadette has produced together with Methuselah, because it is really very enlightening and says what effectively corresponds to reality and truth. Since Methuselah had the truth written down in this wise by Bernadette, I do not understand that.
That is unfortunately so, and I cannot change it because...
That is also to be understood, and it is really not up to you, it is up to them because
I am aware of that, but it is not on my side in my opinion. Besides, I was sued after 30 years because
I'm aware of that. Because Arlian did deal with it, and I know from him that 14 other persons, women and men, also had the same experiences, but Arlian and his crew were able to neutralize them after several years.
Yes, that is correct, but unfortunately from Germany did not come here again.
That was unfortunate, but he knew the truth about your connection with us, which he also put in writing and sent via his friend to you.
That is so, yes.
Some of what you told me in our conversations, that you were there with my grandfather in times past, like at Lake Titicaca more than 3,000 years ago, then in the Far East, where the art island of Saranac.
But I cannot write that down when I recall our conversation. I have dots to make, because I promised Svath back when we were rummaging through the past that I would keep quiet about what really was.
Then this, what I brought up regarding Methuselah. Bermunda photographed it, and we presented it to the committee, which judged it to be of great value, but expressed that some things should still be added, namely.
We can do that straight away, but I would like to make a note of the fact that this is a comment. I received the whole thing from Bernadette on a stick and have transferred it to my computer. Then we can go straight to Dot.
That was done quickly, but I think you will only add the many pages at the end of our conversation when you call this up and write it down, because there would be far too much of a break in the conversation when you read it.
Of course I can do that, but then I will only put the whole thing in after Bernadette's sprinkles.
What is that? Sprinkles, I have already read that, but I do not understand the meaning.
Sprinkles, well, it is a term that actually refers to a patch of skin or a splash of color on a piece of clothing, and is used somewhat differently in various languages. But it is also used for summer stains, as well as for extracts from a piece of writing or for short explanations in response to questions.
I was not aware of that. Thank you for the explanation.
You are welcome, but you do not need to thank me for that, because it is clear and self-evident that something will be explained if it is necessary.
I disagree with you on that. But let me read this amazing. Wait, I want to see what is written, really very amazing. These explanations, they are so precise and really explanatory. Bernadette has effectively learnt so much that she could really be envied. It is not just a few traces of teaching that she has written down here, but the whole thing has been thought through logically to a large extent.
It is truly remarkable, and I am very glad that Bernadette has taken on the valuable work of answering questions in this regard, and done it more than to satisfaction. Unfortunately, however, there is no one who I could assume would be able to continue this valuable work when Bernadette will have gone her last way.
That really will be a problem that will not be easy to solve.
Yes, it will be.
Yes, but something else. You spoke the other day about broadcasts in the early hours of the morning on German television stations regarding unidentified flying objects. I was interested in this and found various stations that actually broadcast such programs, also during the day. These broadcasts are not very informative and are usually based on assumptions and thus conjectures, which really cannot be described as very informative because no real facts are mentioned, because such facts are obviously not known to the persons discussing them. However, as we have stated on various occasions, as you are well aware, such facts are effectively given, but they are kept under lock and key and secret, such as, but which should not be talked about as you.
Of course, and I also abide by that. Besides, I do not deal with the UFOs that I am often asked about, because on the one hand, I am not interested in them, as I'm also not interested in what they do because they do not relate to you Plejaren in any wise. And what they look like, big and also small, that is not my business, nor what they want and their interests and where they are stationed, etc. Etc. I'm not interested in all that, because what I already know from Svath and also from you is quite enough for me. But I do not care about that, Because firstly, I have just as little and nothing to do with it as you, Playaran, also do not, and that is why I do not think I have to talk about it or concern myself with it.
That is also correct. But now, dear friend, I have to fulfill my duties and leave. If there is nothing more important to do,
At least not today.
then goodbye, Edward. Things will come up again soon, and I will be here again. Farewell, dear friend.
That is also to you, Quetzal. Take care.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 4 by Bernadette Brand.
Unfortunately, some questions take longer in my mail folder before I can process them. This may be because I need a creation energy teaching lesson from Billy in order to answer them, but I only ask him for this when he has time and is in good health to answer my questions. Or it may also be because I simply do not have the time, or, frankly, sometimes I just do not feel like dealing with complicated and overlong emails. For the following 2 sprinkles, however, I really did need Billy's tuition to help me think, so to speak.
Question. I have a question regarding Billy's explanation in Contact Report 886 about natural sexual orientations. Specifically, I stumbled across zoophilia bestiality as a natural sexual orientation. In contrast, in the book of Genesis, starting on page 200 verses 10, 15, 16, and 19, zoophilia sodomy is described as behavior contrary to nature. How does this contradiction come about?
Answer. Most readers have probably stumbled across zoophilia, and most have certainly misunderstood it. Of course, this should not be an invitation to try it out, but naturalness finds its justification in a completely different wise than assumed. I am copying Billy's explanation from the 887th contact into my answer below, in which he explains what is meant by naturalness.
Well, it is only a very few human beings at a time who give any thought regarding what is being said. For example, I was asked by telephone for a more detailed interpretation of what I recently said and explained regarding sexual practices. This in the sense that such things are natural to every life form. It is obviously necessary for me to come back to this topic and explain that in any case, naturalness, if I now start from human beings alone, although it concerns all living wesen, also in fauna and flora, is always and exclusively based on the fact that human beings themselves conceive, determine, practice, and therefore might, etc., this behavior. So if a human being displays or exercises a certain behavior, way of acting, way of speaking, or mannerism, then he creates the corresponding appearance. Conduct, behavior, his actions or his demeanor, his way of behaving and thus his actions himself, and indeed everything as his habitus, his basic attitude dictates. And human beings form this habitus themselves in every respect, which means that it happens completely naturally when human beings, since they have free will and also use it voluntarily, form their habitus in a completely natural way and allow themselves to inherit it or anchor it in themselves. The human being thus allows his basic attitude to develop within him in a completely natural way, namely through his free will, which he inherits and gives birth to through his speech or actions to the outside world, or which he exercises by carrying out his basic attitude. Thus, the appearance or manners and actions of a person form the totality of their good or bad preferences, habits, the nature of their social behavior, but also the forms of good, evil, or degeneracy. All forms, however, are naturally created according to free will, but the origin can be different, so it can be based on a wrong form of education, imitation, indoctrination, emotional arousal and false teaching, or in lustful degeneration. Thus, everything and every aspect of a human being's behavior, his entire habitus, is naturally formed, and naturally so, because everything and every aspect is created and formed according to free will, both positive and negative, good and bad, degenerate and virtuous. Thus also the normal and abnormal in human understanding, as these exist in many forms.
Of course, this does not exclude what is written in Genesis, but explains that the path to unnatural behavior is quite natural.
Further question. My thoughts were along the same lines, that is to say, naturally unnatural behavior. The forms of homosexuality, bisexuality, lesbianism, and ipsism, which I can understand as naturally unnatural behavior, are mentioned in the same breath as zoophilia. So is bestiality also innate? And what is the case, for example, with pedophilia, necrophilia, and all other abnormalities and abominations? Do they also correspond to naturalness, just in the negative? Is that how it should be understood? I am aware that pedophilia, for example, is a crime against children, but is it not also a crime when animals are abused for sexual gratification? In any case, there are still some questions that concern me. There is still a lot of crunching and snorting going on.
Answer. Pedophilia, necrophilia, and other abominations, also bestiality or zoophilia, correspond to uncontrolled sexual abuse. Zoophilia correspond to uncontrolled Ausartung of the thinking of human beings and are in no way innate or unnaturally natural, but only outgrowths of the unrestrained, uncontrolled and debauched fantasizing thinking of human beings, who do not curb their fantasies in this respect in any wise or steer them into appropriate channels, but give them free rein without discipline until they take possession of them and their thinking completely unleashed and cause them to act in ways that are neither natural nor humanly justifiable. With regard to pedophilia, for example, this absolutely reprehensible sexual Ausartung occurs exclusively in human beings and has no equal in the animal and animal kingdom, at least not until the animal or animal life forms have reached sexual maturity or have grown up. Mergers of parents with their own sexually mature offspring usually only occur in exceptional cases, and also only when an animal or animal species is at a critical mass of extinction. This shows that pedophilia is neither unnaturally natural for human beings, nor could it be argued that children would perform sexual acts on themselves when they get to know their own bodies in a playful way, which is in no wise connected with any sexual impulses or lustful fulfillment, but only serves to explore their own bodies and their reactions. Sexual feelings only begin to emerge as puberty progresses and human beings approach adulthood or psychological sexual maturity. But their development must not be disrupted by the premature and irresponsible intervention of pathological pedophiles who argue that the children or adolescents also wanted that. If the sexual development of a child or adolescent is disturbed by such actions through compulsive interventions by uncontrolled, conscienceless adults of both sexes who are oblivious to their duties, the result is lifelong maldevelopment and behavioral disorders, as well as long-term psychological consequences. The same applies to necrophilia, which is caused by thoughtless, irresponsible, licentious and unleashed fantasies that human beings consciously build up and devise within themselves until, they escalate into compulsive behavior that they can no longer control and ultimately give into. Basically, the cause of all Ausartung and debauchery is to be found in an absolute lack of self-control and thought control, and in the fact that the human beings concerned feel attracted by the allure of the forbidden and succumb to this allure precisely because they lack thought control, self-control, a sense of responsibility, and a sense of reality.
Question. When studying the book Again of All Existence again and again, I noticed the following. On page 16 in the last paragraph, it says that the most highly developed, that is to say the 1049th universe form, which then integrates into the absolute absolutum after completing its highest development, is the Patali level. Quote, which can develop out of itself into ever higher universe forms, up to the highest 1049th universe level, or the so-called Patali level, which integrates into the absolute absolutum after its highest development. So far, I have assumed that the p-tail level as such also exists in our Dern universe or in our creation universal consciousness as the lowest of the 1049 forms of creation. This would be consistent with the statement on page 97 in the second paragraph, where it says that the p-tail level in its highest form is close to the creation universal consciousness and ultimately merges with it. Maybe I am wrong, but these two passages seem contradictory to me.
Answer. Basically, there is absolutely no contradiction between the two passages, but rather a very long gap in your thinking, which has its reason in the fact that you are making exactly the same mistake that many others also make. Namely, to occupy yourself in depth with a purely theoretical piece of information that you should only take note of as an indication, superstructure, or ultimate goal of all development. This ultimate goal does not affect us human beings personally in any wise and also does not affect us. Or rather, it does not bring any human being any further in his development towards true humanity, which is first and foremost the most outstanding, highest and most important goal for us human beings to achieve. The incomprehensibly long history of our creation and its infinitely many levels and stages of evolution up to the absolute absolutum are not important for human beings. The rough overview offered by the Book of Origins is nothing more than an abstract overall picture of all, becoming and passing over periods of time that human consciousness is unable to grasp, and which are not only irrelevant to its development, but simply irrelevant. Moreover, they concern completely different evolutionary processes than those of human beings. We human beings have nothing to do with these evolutionary processes, and we will also never have anything to do with them, because our individual swinging waves and forces will one day, when we have completed our evolution as human beings, continue to develop on completely different levels without personality, and as an unrecognizable part of immense energies, and will be infinitely amplified. The creation energy teaching and the human values and virtues that it teaches are the only relevant and important things for us human beings, whereby the main emphasis is on daily and personal realization, which for us means evolution. This is the only thing we should concern ourselves with in depth, namely with ourselves and who we are, what we want, how we act and behave, how we approach our environment and other human beings, and how we respond to them, understand them, are helpful to them, and share our knowledge and insights with them. But back to the Pata Li level, this arises together with every first created universe of creation, and is a part of it for as long as it exists, and also remains so through all 1049 stages of development. If a creation reaches its highest form, then the petal level also reaches its highest form together with it, and integrates into the absolute absolutum after passing through the 1049th form, after which the development then progresses to the seen absolutum, which in turn expands infinitely.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 5 by Bernadette Brand.
In the emails that are sent to me, questions are repeatedly asked about faith, whereby it is obviously difficult for some questioners to understand what faith actually is and how it manifests itself, or in what form faith expresses itself, and in what relationships it occurs or can occur. Also, the content of such questions is the assumption that there is some kind of knowledge of faith, which is simply impossible because faith and knowledge are absolutely mutually exclusive.
Question. The connection between belief and knowledge is the point I am stumbling over. The basic problem is that belief cannot be completely eliminated, but must be transformed step by step. So you see, it is being done, but it cannot be completed at a certain end point. A beautiful Sisyphean task. Response. To make a long story short, there is no connection or point of contact whatsoever between faith and knowledge. Faith can also not be transformed into knowledge. because it is always, and without exception, indeterminate and without solid ground underfoot, so to speak. Belief is always an assumption, even if it is based on supposed knowledge that can never be verified and can also never be proven. Belief is always stagnation and immobility in thinking, because it blocks all inner freedom and overrides one's own free thinking, whereby it is absolutely impossible for what is believed to ever become a certainty due to the impossibility of finding something believed in reality. Belief cannot be eliminated because it paralyzes free thinking and logic through the absolute negation of truth, which is replaced and virtually eliminated by illusions, assumptions, fantasies, and assertions. Knowledge, on the other hand, is the result of absolute experience and realization based on pure, provable facts and reality, that is to say, truth. In contrast to belief, this stimulates our thinking and creativity as well as objective cognition and allows us to recognize and comprehend the truth or facts, which results in experience. This in turn leads to an unshakable certainty, to an inner "it is so," which cannot be refuted or overridden by anything, precisely because it is rooted in the truth. Truth is always, and in every case, provable and comprehensible, and always logical without exception. The foundation of knowledge and truth is solely the provable, comprehensible and logical reality, the facts that we have before our eyes and that take root within us and free us from all uncertainty, eliminate our useless fears and reduce all belief to absurdity. Belief cannot be transformed. That is an absolute impossibility, because human beings can only free themselves from it by rigorously turning to the facts and ignoring any remnant of faith within themselves, and only orientating themselves towards reality. The facts and their logical insights and experiences, and allowing them to come to the fore in their thinking. The human being thus gradually frees himself from faith without explicitly dealing with it, and without exposing himself to the danger of falling prey to new or simply different beliefs. The human being should make room in his thinking for nothing other than what he can logically comprehend, and nothing other than what has proven to be correct and true or fact and reality in his life, and should consistently focus on this. Comparisons between truth and faith are simply impossible and lead to unnecessary detours doubts and uncertainties, because in this wise faith can always creep uncontrollably into thinking and paralyze it, which cannot be the purpose of the whole thing, because only truth, reality, facts, and reality are able to liberate thinking, whereby all faith fades and automatically dissolves into nothingness. Supplementary question. Let us take a scientist who is trying to find a cure for a particular cancer. This person is aware of his or her limitations and uses experiments to get to the bottom of the problem. Of course, he or she uses a hypothesis and experiments to answer the question, but this is just a process to arrive at a solution. Now, could you elaborate on the example above? Is this person using a belief by hypothesizing and finding a solution in this wise? Or is this person aware of their limitations and has to start somewhere?
Answer. To take up the example, I assume that a scientist who wants to develop a new cancer drug already has in-depth knowledge of the type of cancer and how it works in the body, which he has acquired over time as a result of his previous work on this disease. He has therefore made certain observations which he has memorized and which prompt him to think step by step, and to come up with new or expanded considerations as to how this type of cancer is to be brought under control. This means that he thinks about how and in what wise the cancer works in the body and causes damage to it. Based on his previous experience and his further considerations, the scientist develops ideas on how he can influence the way the cancer works and prevent it from spreading, or how he could make the cancer retreat and disappear, which would correspond to a cure. He will try out these ideas with an open mind and, based on his observations and the new findings, will repeatedly adapt or discard them and make new attempts. He will carry out the whole procedure until he comes to an accurate realization, which is then inevitably followed by the experience that he has found a good way through his experiments. But this does not mean that he has already reached the goal, because an intermediate station can also already be a success and a confirmation that the path he has taken could be promising. If the scientist were to start from a firm conviction as the basis for his research, then he would never be able to reach his goal, because a conviction always corresponds to a belief and a compulsion, and these restrict his free thinking or make it impossible, because he would be fixated on reaching the goal in a certain way due to his conviction, which is why he could no longer think and research with an open mind. A conviction always and without exception corresponds to a fixed idea and a self-imposed or indoctrinated prejudice, or a fixed assumption and opinion that something must correspond to a certain form or wise or fixed concept. Basically, however, a conviction is definitely nothing more than a rigid, obsessive belief that cannot allow any deviation from the conviction, and that prevents and even makes free, truthful and fact-based thinking impossible, because all observations, results, findings and clues that are gained from failures and could lead further are disregarded, negated, and simply pushed aside or ignored and considered worthless because they do not correspond to the preconceived opinion or conviction.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 6 by Bernadette Brand.
Foreign thoughts and their consequences are just as much a part of the questions that reach me by email as correct behavior in dubious situations. As some of the questions are asked in longer emails, which in turn could allow conclusions to be drawn about the person asking the question, I take the liberty of shortening the content of the emails to the essentials and formulating the questions in such a way that the anonymity of the person asking the question is preserved and trustworthiness is maintained. Here are the following 2 examples.
Question: I have noticed that a very important topic has not been covered in Billy's books. It is about foreign thoughts in meditation and in daily life. An unrivaled danger relates to extraneous thoughts that can last the whole day and feel as if you are flying. They come and go, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, and distract you from your own actions. They are practically always there if you let them break through and do not try to keep them under control. When given free rein, this can lead to dementia, depending on the type and strength of thoughts. I have had this experience in my own family, some of whose relatives have developed severe dementia, while others have successfully fought it off. But I also fear that dementia is hereditary and that this tendency has been passed on to me. I endeavor to be alert throughout the day, and this has a positive effect on my evening meditation. What I have written is from my own experience, and I would ask you to write something about it, as my findings could be wrong.
Answer: in your mail, you address the subject of extraneous thoughts, which is dealt with in detail in the books Introduction to Meditation, as well as in Meditation from a Clear Perspective and in Teaching Letters 44 and 45, and also in Special Teaching Letters 29-29 and 36-36. In these writings, it is clearly explained that extraneous thoughts are thoughts that creep uncontrollably into the mind, distract from the actual subject of thought, and tempt us to give in to them, and thus allow ourselves to be torn out of concentration. Of course, this applies not only to meditation, but to all activities that require our undivided attention, as extraneous thoughts also creep in and cause human beings to turn away from what they want or should be concentrating on. In principle, extraneous thoughts are thoughts that do not belong to the topic that the human being is thinking about, which leads to moments of inattention that can have devastating consequences if they cannot be brought under control. This control can be learnt through meditation, among other things, which helps human beings to sharpen their attention and slowly learn a consistent attitude towards extraneous thoughts by simply pushing them aside and ignoring them. Over time, these extraneous thoughts then slowly subside and flatten out due to the learnt inner attitude and way of reacting, which in turn promotes attention and also facilitates concentration. Human beings who do not learn to bring their thoughts under control run the risk of becoming victims of their own carelessness towards their thinking. In other words, they become lazy and erratic thinkers, easily distracted, inattentive, believers and follow illusory thoughts, as a result of which their thinking atrophies and they eventually slowly but surely become stupid, which can ultimately lead to dementia, among other things. Dementia is in no wise genetic because genetic influences only exist in relation to physical conditions or circumstances, such as physical ailments. However, dementia can not only be caused by the lack of or failure to take care of one's own thoughts, but also by external influences, such as blows to the head, a stroke, or the late effects of unconsciousness, etc., as well as, for example, high blood pressure and other physical causes that damage microvessels in the brain. Thinking is solely subject to the initiative of the human being and is learned or acquired through contemplation, observation, education, imitation, etc., through which thinking is stimulated, after which the human being must then learn to direct it into the correct channels of reason and understanding, and to distinguish attentively between correct and incorrect, reasonable and unreasonable, clear and diffuse, resulting in mental self-control, which is developed and expanded purely individually, corresponding to the character and personality of the human being. Learning to think correctly, factually, reasonably, and intelligibly is a long and often arduous process, especially when pointless and meaningless distractions and amusements are prioritized and not kept under control. Indifference to one's own thinking can have devastating consequences. Because the damage is gradual and eventually becomes irreversible, as the power to think is lost, just as muscle strength also dwindles when human beings do not use it. The only way to counteract the atrophy of thinking is through attention. Factual thinking, meditation, concentration, and occupation with meaningful and beneficial thought content, and this is a lifelong task that is sometimes easier and sometimes more difficult to master.
Question. Recently, I was the victim of latent sexual harassment. The attacker came on to me with explicit offers, even though he knows that I am happily married and have a family. The assault shook me all the more, as I had been subjected to such attacks in my early years, and the recent derailment took place in front of witnesses at the center. Some of the witnesses expressed sympathy. Others wanted to remain neutral, but felt that the whole thing was based on a misunderstanding, while still others insinuated that the account of my truly traumatic experience amounted to gossip and slander, and that I should keep my mouth shut. How should I have best behaved? And would it not be best to publicize your letter reprimanding the attacker and calling him to order?
Response: to get straight to the point. Billy and I believe that the following quote from him in Contact Report 169 is absolutely true.
It really is a crying shame. Human beings on Earth think that they would achieve their goals through hypocrisy, stubbornness, selfishness, etc. I have had completely different experiences. Svath once explained to me that you do not achieve any progress or self-knowledge if you blaspheme against your fellow human beings, look for their faults, and tell others off. He taught me that if you want to learn something, you have to keep your mouth shut, that you only register the mistakes of others when they catch your eye, but that you should never talk about them. You can only observe, keep your mouth shut, register, and think about it thoroughly. The point of this reflection however, is that you only use the fault you see in your fellow human beings as an opportunity to look at yourself and see whether the same fault is also present in yourself and can therefore be recognized and rectified. But anyone who talks about the mistakes of others and therefore also belittles and betrays others never learns anything. On the contrary, a human being who only sees the mistakes of others and talks about them to others or belittles them is never capable of thinking truthfully and recognizing their own mistakes. The human being also always tries to mold his fellow human beings into his own template by harassing him, blackmailing him, arguing with him, talking about him behind his back, and doing everything else that is evil. However, all this also has an effect on the study of truthful teaching, such as spiritual teaching, creation energy teaching, etc., because a human being with this way of life is then simply unable to concentrate on a truly spiritual conscious study. He lacks the strength for this, which he wastes by focusing his attention on his neighbor's mistakes, as a result of which he lacks any strength and progress for self-knowledge and his own evolution. The forces that would be required for self-study, spiritual study and self-knowledge, etc., are eaten up by wrong behavior, which consists in making fun of others, insulting others, incorrectly observing others, and looking for faults in others. Instead of human beings sweeping up their own mess and putting it away, they always clean up after others. But of course, everyone claims that this is not the case, and that the other person was so rude and conspicuous, as well as rebellious, aggressive, and faulty, that they could not have ignored it. However, nobody thinks about the fact that this lame excuse is absolutely no excuse me, because it only reveals their own misbehavior all the more. Everyone always wants to be better than their neighbor, because the delusion of self-praise and self-assessment is greater than any honesty in human beings.
Regardless of the views and reactions of the witnesses, the most sensible response to such incidents is to remain silent after we have clearly and unequivocally called the offender to order. Nothing more is necessary. On the contrary, if our letter were to be publicized, it would only have the consequence that this story would be warmed up again and again and lead to endless discussions, which would be a disservice to you. Injuries inflicted on human beings, whether they are psychological or physical, can only heal by leaving the wounds alone and not disturbing them again and again by dragging them endlessly into the light of day. This means that although you have to deal with it and process it within yourself, you should not talk about it with too many human beings, not even with witnesses and those present who have their own perceptions of the whole thing and their own views on it. Talking about it again and again and trying to get those present on your side, or expecting or even demanding certain reactions from them, has nothing to do with processing and coming to terms with what happened in a sensible way, but everything to do with retaliation and a desire for revenge, which is not neutral, but demands that the human being who behaved wrongly and crossed boundaries that he should have respected be punished. This, however, is vigilante justice and the simple exercise of revenge? And this does not help the injured human beings, but instead causes what has happened to resurface in them again and again, whereby the inner wounds do not heal, but remain open and get worse and worse. Apart from that, the fact that people continue to talk about what happened can lead to parties forming that turn against each other, which can lead to arguments and discord, and ultimately to victims and perpetrators being ostracized, which would only lead to further hurt. The fundamental mistake you made is that you did not report the incident to us immediately, which would have allowed us to bring the offender to justice immediately and on the spot. In this wise, further derailments by him would have been prevented from the outset, and the whole thing would not have escalated to the extent that it did. The way we see it, hardly anyone would have noticed the first assault, and there would have been no further unpleasantness for you, which would have made everything more bearable for you. Finally, it also does not matter what the witnesses who referred to the quote from the 169th contact report wanted to say. The quote itself is neutral and completely correct, and your interpretations of why they sent it to you are purely speculative. And you should refrain from such self-interpretations, because you are only hurting yourself, which is completely unnecessary, because the views and opinions of others have no relevance to you or to what happened. The only important thing is that you come to terms with what has happened and put it behind you.
An open word from Methuselah. Meyer about Billy Edward Albert Meyer and the Figus.
About my personality, my name is Methuselah Meyer. I was born on the 31st of October 1973 in Wetzikon, ZH, as the youngest son of Billy Edward Albert Meyer and Calliope Meyer Zafiriou. Our family, which also included my older siblings Gilgamesha and Atlantis, lived at Wiehaldenstrasse 10 in Hinwil until I was 4 years old, where the core group of Figu began to form very quickly after my father's first official contacts with extraterrestrial life forms. On 7th of April 1977, we moved to Hinterschmidruti in the Tuss Valley. The Hinterschmidruti farm was in a devastating state, and I felt as if we had moved onto a battlefield rather than a farm. Even before we moved in, my father and Jacobus Bertschinger began the most necessary repair work on the buildings. They were soon also joined by some of the human beings who had already been regular visitors to Hinwil and had spoken to my father. It was a very hard and labor-intensive time for everyone involved, which demanded everyone's full physical and mental commitment. Under my father's guidance and with his active help, we often worked late into the night or into the early hours of the morning. For most of the volunteers, it was a double burden because they worked in their regular jobs during the day and often traveled from far and wide to Hinterschmidruti in the evening, where they then continued to work for a long time. It took around 7 years before the worst was over and the times of hard physical labor became noticeably easier for everyone. It is thanks in particular to my father's tireless creative drive, his foresight in planning, and his negotiating skills that a paradise has been created under his management and leadership over the past 20 years. The beginning in Hinterschmidruti was not an easy time for us children either, as we also felt some of the burden that was placed on everyone. However, we did not yet understand the extent of the daily drudgery, and only saw that our dad was at work from early in the morning until late at night, and until his body collapsed. It was only years later that it dawned on me what was actually going on during this time, and it is a mystery to me where my father always found the energy to motivate human beings and keep them together. Today I understand what I could not understand before, namely that my father had an extremely important and difficult job to do, and that he also continued to do it despite his failing health. Unfortunately, my understanding of the difficult circumstances in which my father found himself was only awakened in recent years, when I had to realize how great the attacks from outside were and how much additional pressure he was under from my mother. The beginnings of Figu, it is still often claimed that Figu is a cult and that my father is its great guru, but he is not the human being who would sit on a throne and keep any work at bay. He has never been the kind of man who could be said to be work-shy or to only give orders. On the contrary, he always set a good example and worked hard and tirelessly, often well into the night and morning hours. Kitting, shoveling, paving and concreting were never ending in the early years, and when everyone else was completely exhausted, he would sit behind the typewriter for days and nights on end and take in contact reports by telepathic transmission. He wrote on the Spirit Teaching from 2023 equals Creation Energy Teaching, which he had started in 1979, or on a new book. And he also created the Voice of the Aquarian Age, which appeared monthly in the first few years and later bi-monthly, before it was decided to publish it only once a quarter. Much of the major work carried out in Hinterschmidruti was only realized under his guidance. All the core group members who joined in the first few years had little or no knowledge of construction work, etc. And so my father was not only a teacher of creation energy teaching, but also of labor. There was hardly any work that he did not understand, and that he could not have demonstrated and taught to the men and women in the group in a professional manner. Whether it was construction work, woodwork, or agricultural matters, horticulture and garden architecture, housekeeping, shopping, or energy issues and electrics, he was and is knowledgeable in all subject areas and often knows more than recognized experts. He is also often asked for advice on healthcare, nutrition, and medicine because of his extensive knowledge. The early years at the center were difficult, not only because the work was hard and tiring, but also because human beings with fundamentally different characters clashed, which often led to massive and vociferous disagreements, the escalation of which was often only stopped by my father's even louder shouting. The disagreements between the center's residents and the resulting fights soon made it clear to everyone that a certain order was needed to regulate coexistence. In addition to these internal difficulties, which demanded a lot of strength from my father, who held the reins in all situations, there were also attacks from outside, which also demanded his full attention. No sooner had we moved into the Hinterschmidruti farm than all sorts of people, and especially opponents of my father and his mission, were vandalizing vehicles, buildings, and facilities at every possible opportunity. This circumstance and the fact that it was not long before the attacks on my father's life, which had already begun in Hinwil, became more frequent, soon made it necessary to introduce a night watch at the center, which initially patrolled the grounds armed until everything had calmed down somewhat. My father was the real driving force behind the growing Figu-O, especially in the first and hardest years. With his one arm, he had lost the other in a car accident in Turkey in the 1960s. He worked harder than all the others, who had two healthy arms, but were usually not only ignorant and unskilled in the work to be done, but often also unwilling and unenthusiastic. Looking back, we can see that even in the first few years at the center, a development was already in the offing that was to cause my father and Figu major problems and had a profound impact on our family life. The pressure that my mother exerted on my honest and kind-hearted father with her constant, massive and unfounded accusations and her wild jealousy scenes were so damaging to him over time that he suffered health consequences. The pressure grew from all sides. The core group that had formed was unable to find peace, not least due to my mother and her nasty intrigues. Our family life was overshadowed by the fierce battles between my mother, who did not shy away from any meanness or primitiveness, and my father, who used all the means at his disposal to finally bring her to her senses. And then there were also the many different attacks from outside, ranging from damage to property, slander and malicious gossip, to the attempted kidnapping of my sister and assassination attempts on my father. On a Tuesday morning at around 4:30 hours, on the 4th of November 1982, the immense stresses and strains that had fallen on my father over the years took their toll. He suffered a serious collapse, during which he fell and hit the back of his head first against a wash basin, then a radiator, and finally into a tiled corner before lying unconscious. As a result of the collapse and the associated accident, my father suffered brain and cerebellar lacerations the size of 5 franc pieces, which simply liquefied over time, as was demonstrated by computer tomography scans in the following years. The consequences of the collapse were devastating. Not only did father suffer partial amnesia, which in certain respects still persists today, but he also lost many of his powers of consciousness with which he had quietly achieved tremendous feats. Sometimes, he was so impaired by his life-threatening brain injury that he no longer even recognized us children. No sooner had he realized the severity of his injuries than he also began to fight them vehemently. His extensive and detailed knowledge of brain function, which far surpasses today's scientific knowledge, stood him in good stead and possibly even saved his life. Despite the severity of his injuries, he was able to gradually reallocate the functions of the injured parts of the brain to other brain regions, which involved lengthy and painstaking learning processes. I still remember well how one day, about 6 months after the accident, he started playing against a chess computer. Initially, he lost practically every game, but gradually, with tireless persistence, he managed not only to win against the chess computer, but even to outwit it. After the electronics had become worthless to him, he began to play regularly against our core group members, especially Silvano and Freddie, who were a great help to him with their years of willingness. For 8 long years, my father was often closer to death than to life, and during this time he not only struggled to lead as normal a life as possible, but also wrote his most important work to date, the book Om. Sometimes it seemed as if the only thing keeping him alive was his self-imposed duty to put this work on paper for humanity. If surviving the collapse was a miracle for the doctors, my father's achievement of coping with the profound consequences of his brain injury without foreign or specialist help and recovering to such an extent that even his environment and those close to him hardly noticed anything was an even greater miracle for them. Only those who have dealt with the consequences of brain injuries and who know about the often far-reaching, tragic and dramatic changes and devastation to the lives of those affected can appreciate what my father has achieved over the years through his own efforts and without any foreign help. His courage and determination to take on the lonely, oppressive and back-breaking battle against the consequences of his injuries and his inner greatness in refusing even the medical help of the Pleiaren, arguing that he did not want to be better off than the rest of humanity, is unrivaled on this planet and probably also among all human beings in the universe who call themselves human. In the years after his accident, while my father was fighting for his life, things slowly began to change in the core group. Over time, the members somehow became more insightful, more mature, and they no longer fought over every little thing like toddlers, but gradually took creation energy teaching more seriously. Their initially modest attempts to put what they had learned into practice in their daily lives gradually bore fruit. After the tough initial struggles, the work was now carried out more willingly and independently, and the more sensible and willing to learn were slowly able to show the way to the more lazy and unwilling. As most members continued to learn, group life as a whole began to calm down and become more peaceful, and many negative influences from all possible sides lost their might over the more susceptible members over time, so that progress became more recognizable. Initially, new members were slow to join the core group, and it was hard for them to find their place and establish themselves. But then, after a break of a few years, they began to board the still small core group in small groups, and each new member not only brought new problems, but also new impulses and new ideas that helped the existing group to develop further. Some core group members were not up to the task and left the FIGU again, and some were also too immature or simply had the wrong ideas. At all times, however, my father was and remained the soul of FIGU, in his simple and modest manner, which makes it impossible for him to see himself as a better human being or an exalted leader. He captivates those human beings who are honestly searching for the truth, for progress and further development. He continues to live his unpretentious life in modest circumstances and is happy to share everything he has with his fellow human beings. Through his way of seeing and understanding himself as equal and on an equal footing with all other human beings, he heals many a nasty inner wound in many human beings. His natural, honest and profound love for human beings is completely selfless, and with his past life, he has a good and formative influence also on the most stubborn and undiscerning human beings. As long as they only strive for the truth, for honest neighborly love, and for progress. Why is only my father in contact with extraterrestrials? This question has not only been answered by my father himself, but also by a number of other authors, and not least the Pleiadians themselves have also commented on it. It seems superfluous to me to go into this question in depth again here, so I would just like to add one more thought. In my opinion, it is not the question or the fact that he maintains contact with extraterrestrials that is decisive, because it is now clear to me and to very many human beings on this earth that we cannot be the only ones in the universe. In my eyes, it is much more about my father also continuing his mission in this life, which he has been fulfilling for many incarnations. He is not a chosen one of some extraterrestrials who have chosen him to act according to their ideas. But for many incarnations, he has been a self-determined and self-responsible teacher of the creational truth, which he has been imparting unwaveringly to Earth humans for thousands of years. Only secondarily is he the only human being who has been contacted by extraterrestrials from the Pleiadian systems and who was chosen by them to ignite and keep alive the controversy about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Apart from my father, the Pleiadian had telepathic contact with 5 other persons, but 3 of them refused to go public because they rightly feared being labeled as weirdos, liars and madmen. 2 others who wanted to join forces with my father were unfortunately killed in a car accident before the planned collaboration could materialize. The 3 human beings who did not dare to go public are also sadly no longer among the living. Extraterrestrials and religions. In my opinion, the fact that my father is accused from many sides of lying, deception, fraud, charlatanry and worse is not solely due to the fact that poor lunatics, envious or ignorant people and know-it-alls cannot or do not want to understand what is going on. Rather, there are a considerable number of human beings on our earth who have a genuine interest in preventing the truth from coming to light, and who therefore, for selfish reasons, vehemently and unbendingly set everything in motion against it that they deem useful for their evil doings. The creational truth that my father seeks to spread among human beings in his mission aims to activate human beings' thinking, to make it independent and autonomous, and to make human beings self-aware and self-responsible, that is to say, in the best sense of the word, free. This kind of self-responsible freedom, which is practiced by the extraterrestrials and held up as the only possible path of evolution, is the enemy of all religions on Earth. They delude human beings into a false sense of freedom by lulling them into believing that they are supported by God, onto whom they can pass all their worries and problems, and who will give them the strength to deal with all their problems and difficulties in return for a faithful and humble belief in Him, and for singing the praises of His divine glory. Through this spinning into imaginary processes, the free thinking of human beings is absorbed, and their concentration is directed solely towards the realization of their imaginations instead of reality. The human being thus becomes manipulable and dependent, and loses access to his original and natural life force, which was given to him by creation. Soft and powerless, he makes himself a slave to unscrupulous exploiters who make him believe in a false, perfect world that he is unable to recognize as the hell of bondage. Changing these circumstances and returning human beings to their true freedom, so that they can embrace progress and master their future, is the real goal of my father and his extraterrestrial friends. If human beings on this planet find their way back to the creational laws and recommendations and learn to think, act and live according to them, then the greatest danger to the future of humanity is averted. As things stand today, however, it seems that many human beings do not want to take responsibility for what they are doing to the planet and their fellow human beings. This inner refusal to look realities in the face and take responsibility relates not only to politics, torture, racial discrimination, subjugation, and shortchanging human beings, but primarily to religions, which play a particularly devious and mean game through their philosophies and teachings. It is very easy to confess in church what a bad human being you are and then go back to your atrocities, because you have been absolved of all your faults and misdeeds by some odd man out who absolved you with a short phrase. Such soporific and stultifying practices are not my father's aim. Rather, his wish corresponds to human beings accepting one another and living together in freedom and love, respecting one another and treating one another with dignity without exception. I have also experienced for myself that he really lives this, because in my early adolescence I did a lot of things that I regret today. These were not just normal childish things or harmless youthful pranks. No, I was guilty of more serious offenses. In addition, seduced by external influences, I acted strongly against my father and the Figu for a long time. After certain experiences led me to realize that my previous actions were not correct, I turned to my father. He and Figu, convinced of my honesty and the seriousness of my endeavors, readily gave me the chance to rectify my mistakes and make up for the damage I had done as far as possible. So my father also had a hard time with me. Calliope Maya Zafiriou and company, I have already mentioned that our family life was under a bad star. Unfortunately, I have to admit that the main cause of our difficult family circumstances was my mother. She made my father's life hell with her domineering nature, her hatred of everything that did not submit to her voluntarily, her thirst for revenge, her notorious mendacity, and her jealousy of everything and everyone that she thought was better and more capable than she was or that really was. As far as I know, she showed him her true character as soon as they were married. And in the time that I can remember, there was hardly a quiet, and certainly not a peaceful minute for him around my mother. Nevertheless, he loved her dearly and did everything in his power to help my mother fight against her deep-seated character defects. From time to time, it seemed as if his efforts would ultimately be crowned with success, which spurred him on to ever new endeavors. Unfortunately, it must also be clearly stated that another of my mother's outstanding character traits is her outstanding talent for acting, with which she is able to fool human beings. My father fell for her tricks more than once, until he had to realize that it was all in vain, and that his efforts would never lead to success. But even then, he did not give up, and persistently endeavored to win my mother over, until she herself left him, and threw it in his face that she did not feel bound to her marriage. She was also responsible for most of the differences in the Figu, as various members soon realized that she was not only scheming with the members, but that she also stole like a magpie and lied and cheated wherever she found the opportunity. Not only did she systematically turn us children against our father, she also knew how to sow in us a deep mistrust of the runaway core group members who spread out in the center and took her and her family's place. It is not surprising that this led to resentment, and that we behaved in a corresponding manner towards most of them, as we were still too young to see through our mother's evil games. My mother's deceitful and cowardly games almost led to the collapse of the Figu on more than one occasion, as she started them even before we moved to Hinterschmidruti. At the center, however, she gradually took everything to extremes, which is why the core group meeting denied her task after it became known how she had handled group property and my father's things. She regularly sold films, photos, and books because she was responsible for these sales during the week, but it became her favorite habit to embezzle the proceeds and pocket them herself. Later, when this task was assigned to another core group member, She simply stole books, films, and photos from their respective storage locations, sold them, and let the proceeds disappear into her own pocket. She even stole from us children without any scruples, and she proved it by stealing from my sister, who had suffered a serious accident and was supposed to receive CHF 1100 from the Japanese Figu group to help with her recovery costs. However, our thieving mother had done the maths without the Japanese when she went to the post office, took the money, and thought that nobody would ever find out about it. When no letter of thanks arrived after some time in Japan, the members of the Japanese group inquired with my father about the money and its whereabouts. Logically, he knew nothing about such an amount, whereupon he asked my mother if she knew anything about it. She immediately denied vehemently and loudly that any money had arrived. A day later, she claimed that she had handed over the full amount to my father. Eventually, in her excitement, she became so entangled in contradictions and accusations against my father and the post office that it soon became crystal clear that she knew something about the whereabouts of the money. Dad then followed up the story, whereupon the postmistress requested the signature book for transfers in Bern, on the basis of which it could be clearly proven that Mum had received the money from Japan and signed for it. But even after Father presented her with a copy of the entry with her signature, she denied having received and embezzled the money, even accusing the post office of fraud, before finally arguing that she was entitled to the money, before finally claiming to have lost the money on the way home, but not without accusing my father of having stolen the money. It was not just the slander, insults, and intrigues that she repeatedly used to harm my father and the group, and that put us children under severe psychological strain. One part of her upbringing consisted of abusing us children behind our father's back and beating us with her fists and feet whenever she deemed it appropriate. I have already mentioned that she also incited and stirred us up against our father and the group members, and so we felt lonely and alone and believed we had the whole world against us. We also reacted accordingly dismissively and viciously to the attempts of the core group members and our father to make friends with us, because under our mother's influence, we considered such behavior to be dishonest and dishonest. While the divorce battle between my father and my mother was going on, a phone call with her brought up her decision. In a rare display of honesty, she freely told me a fictitious, absolutely disastrous story, which she later used as an excuse to file for divorce against my father and to milk him financially like a cow, as she put it. After my parents finally divorced after a long and ugly battle, we hoped that things would finally settle down. During the divorce and also afterwards, most of us children stuck by our mother and stood by her until we had to realize that the fight was far from over for her even after the divorce, and that her purpose in life was to harm our father and Figu. When I was increasingly confronted with my mother's lies and threatened to become a victim of her malicious intrigues myself, I distanced myself from her and turned my attention back to our father, because the events of the last few years had made me realize that the law is on his side. Just how far my mother is prepared to go in her hatred and vindictiveness is shown by the fact that she has for some time now teamed up with Luke Bergin, a so-called journalist and UFO researcher, who is too lazy and apparently incapable of doing any real research, and instead confines himself solely to sticking his nose into things he knows nothing about. From this perspective, I can only conclude that birds of a feather flock together, because together with my mother, Bergin is endeavoring to spread lies and slander by dragging righteous human beings like my father and the members of the Figu through the mud in front of the whole world. The fact that these two have teamed up with one of the biggest Billy haters, Cal K. Korf, only corresponds to logic, because all three are full of ignorance and slavering hatred against my father, whom they hope to destroy with their machinations. But they are obviously so blinded and lowly intelligent that they are unable to realize that the damage they are doing will ultimately be a success for my father and the Figu. Just as I turn in disgust against the machinations of my mother and her satellites, many others will distance themselves from her and her lies in realization of the truth. However, in my opinion, it is no pity for those who fall for her lies and stick to them. As I said, my father is in the right in every respect, and he will not be lured out of the reserve by the drooling intrigues of Calliope Maya and her ilk. Father pursues the best of all strategies that a human being who is in the right can pursue. He simply lets the impostor Korf, the loudmouth Bergin, and my mendacious mother go nowhere, because he has no time to worry about slanderers and no-goods, etc., as is so often the case. This triumvirate will also backfire in the end, especially as Korf's so-called research is based on fantasy and pure invention. He has often misused my father's photographs as forgeries in order to discredit him in public. Korf's methods and the outrageous stories he has been spinning can be read in the Figu Bulletin No. 14 of March 1998 and in the pamphlet A Refutation of Korf's False Claims and Distortions, written by James W. Deardorff, an emeritus research professor at Oregon State University. Korf may have visited the center, but it had little to do with real research. If honesty had been his intention, he would hardly have turned up under the false name of Steve Thomas. Someone should explain to me why someone has to act under a false name, if his intentions are clear, and he has nothing to fear. I rather think that Korf is the same dishonest and ignorant guy as Luke Bergin, who simply writes and publishes a slanderous story about Billy Meier in order to make money and attach the nice-sounding label UFO researcher to himself. Korf and Bergin could earn their money in an honest way if they would honestly call themselves defamation stories or story writer. But for that they lack, to put it in good Swiss German, Svudli, which in good German means that they are cowardly wimps and have also proven that so far. Apart from being cowards, they are also even more lowly intelligent than straw, because they do not realize that by shouting and nagging they are drawing the world's attention to my father in the correct way, thereby not only laying a further foundation stone for his success, but also building up the brickwork of his mission. Very few people are as stupid as Korf, Bergin and my mother believe, because those who matter to my father and the Figu, and who are capable of helping them in their mission, those human beings are independent enough in their thinking and in their views to convince themselves of the facts on the spot. And once they have got that far, then my father and the Figu have won the game, because sooner or later the truth will have spoken for itself. I will also always stand by what is written here, and I will especially always stand by my father. I allowed myself to be misled by my mother long enough until I finally became clever enough to recognize the truth. I believe that you can always speak the truth at any time without having to fear the consequences. Today I can confirm with a good conscience that everything my father does and says corresponds to the truth, because I could and can convince myself of the facts. The human beings will find it difficult to understand that I am accusing my mother of lying, but is she not also doing the same to me when she claims that the sightings, buzzing noises and photographs that I have witnessed myself on various occasions are dishonest machinations on the part of my father? The advantage of my statements for me is that I can prove everything I have said, and that my father's material has been examined many times and found to be genuine. The siren noises, of which tapes still exist today, are of a range and quality that could not have been realized even with the most modern equipment at the time, and that clearly speaks for itself. Who is Billy Meier? Many human beings may think that my father was born under special circumstances or omens. Such assumptions do not correspond to the facts, as my father was born on the 3rd of February 1937 in Bulach, ZH, the son of a shoemaker and a housewife. In those days, working-class children were expected to work hard at an early age, so my father soon learnt to pitch in with his daily chores. Up to the age of 5, my father had a completely normal childhood for the time, apart from the extraordinary aspects of his own development. With the author's permission, I quote the other details of my father's life story from Guido Moosbrugger's book, Onze Vliegendag, through his contacts with extraterrestrials, which he first practiced as a 5-year-old. He learned a great deal, but he increasingly segregated himself from his peers, and in this wise became an outsider and troublemaker, both in the village and school community, and also in his own family. This is the only way to understand why he was always blamed for all the bad things that happened. But instead of defending himself, he remained silent as the grave to all the accusations that were unjustly leveled at him. The further consequence of this was that he was declared unfit for education and sent to various reform centers. But of course, no one wanted to keep such an oddball around for any length of time, so he was moved from one place to another. When the constant shuffling back and forth became too much for him, he took off without further ado, roamed the woods all alone, and fed on whatever food he could find. Eventually, however, he was picked up again and again and taken to a new location, where the same game was repeated for around 4 years. Finally, one fine day, he was locked up in a psychiatric hospital, where he was examined for his mental state, among other things. After he was treated very badly here, he decided to flee the country, which he also managed to do under extremely difficult and life-threatening circumstances. In any case, he made his way across the border to France and enlisted in the Foreign Legion at the age of 15. He soon realized that this had been a mistake, as escaping from the Legion seemed virtually impossible. Nevertheless, he also managed this feat and was able to escape to the other bank of the Rhine. When he returned to Switzerland, he reported to the authorities. Inexplicably, however, he still remained silent about all sorts of accusations, and after his above-average intelligence was recognized by the psychologists and psychiatrists at the Rheinau Cantonal Clinic, he was put on trial and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Although he was basically innocent and spent years in prison, he simply could not bring himself to defend himself. But somehow the negative also has to fulfill a positive purpose, and this clearly seems to have been the case here. This extremely tough teaching served as excellent preparation for the difficult tasks he still had to master. From today's perspective, Billy has the following opinion. The time in prison and in an institution was not simply useless, I must confess, because during this time I learnt much more in terms of consciousness than I ever did in freedom. Than I could ever have learnt in freedom. A very important learning factor for me was also the realization that a human being must be humble and selfless in order to be truly human. After he had served his time, nothing could keep him back in Switzerland, and so he traveled through 42 countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia. By the time he returned to Switzerland in 1969, he had covered a total of around 2,500 kilometers in 12 years, about 1/10 of which he traveled on foot, the rest by bicycle, car, truck, bus, boat, small plane, helicopter, and train. Of course, his means of transport also included the horse and camel, as well as the donkey and ox cart, and especially in India, of course, the elephant. This gave him the opportunity to get to know the country and its people and gain important experience. Completely destitute, he seized every work opportunity that presented itself to earn his daily bread. Under the pressure of necessity, Billy learnt and practiced no fewer than 352 different jobs at short notice. In many cases, he had very little time to learn a job that was completely new to him. Occasionally, he was granted a slightly longer period, but he never had enough time for an apprenticeship lasting several years, as is generally the case. On one occasion, he was occupied with tasks in which he was able to utilize his extensive knowledge of theology, theosophy, psychology, and psychiatry, namely as a priest and pastor, medicine man, village doctor, and cattle doctor. At other times he worked as a bricklayer, glass mason, carpenter, and marble cutter, as a painter and plumber, and so on. He is also skilled in forestry, agriculture, road construction, landscaping, and so on. As far as his typing skills are concerned, he could rival any typist. In West Pakistan, he worked as a smuggler, which was considered a respectable occupation there. He also earned his living as a German teacher, blaster, security guard, special agent against criminal activities, and private detective. In the latter capacity, he eventually lost his left arm. Of course, his many jobs later stood him in good stead when setting up the center in Hinterschmidruti. He also devoted himself to the study of all world religions and gained a clear picture of the most important world views. To enrich his knowledge, he was also not afraid to temporarily join various sects and secret societies. For the purpose of instruction, he even stayed with wise men in India, whose existence is hardly known to the world public, as they live in seclusion like hermits and hardly ever appear in public. A heavy blow of fate struck him on 4th of August 1965 in Iskenderun in Turkey. As already mentioned, he lost his left arm in a bus accident there. He was left lying unconscious in the ditch for 4 hours under the assumption that he was dead. It was only later that the mistake was realized, but too late to save his arm. Unfortunately, the necessary amputation was carried out under catastrophic conditions and anything but professionally, so that Billy had to suffer from more or less severe phantom pain in the remaining arm stump for the rest of his life. On the 25th of December of the same year, he met his wife Calliope in Greece and became engaged to her on the 25th of January 1966. Due to family difficulties, he stole his bride on the 25th of February 1966 and married her after various complications on 25th of March 1966 in Corinthos. This marriage produced 3 children, Gilgamesha, Atlantis, and Methuselah. Unfortunately, the problems and conflicts also did not stop at his own doorstep, so that he did not have an easy life in the family either. But as incomprehensible as it may sound to some, this also had its purpose, because Billy needed 2 strong first-class pillars to be able to cope with his strenuous task. Anyone who knows Billy only briefly or by reputation may be disappointed to realize or hear that neither his pedigree nor his habitus indicate anything special about him. He has no material wealth, no prestigious social or state position, and no illustrious professional title, not even a high school education, let alone a doctorate. The only thing he can boast in this respect is his honorary title of Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, conferred by the Ahmadiyya Mosque in Karachi, West Pakistan. His wife Calliope was awarded the honorary title of Sheikha Aisha Abdullah. In addition, Billy was awarded the master title of 5th Dan Honoris Causa in August 1988 on behalf of all Japanese karate clubs. But apart from that, he is apparently just an unassuming man who perhaps just wants to make himself important. On the surface, he is also no more than any other human being, who has weaknesses as well as merits. He also makes mistakes, which are absolutely necessary for his further development. The worst disappointment is for those people who think Billy absolutely has to wear a halo over his head, but that is also not the case. But outward appearances are deceptive, as the old saying goes, and in Billy's case, I have to say, they are very deceptive. Only a few people have actually recognized his true greatness because his talents are largely hidden, and because he does not make his mark in public for everyone to see. This is also one of the main reasons why Billy has not given any interviews for years, with very few exceptions, so as not to give the impression that he just wants to put himself in the spotlight as a world-famous contact man. Only those who know Billy correctly also really know what he can do and what he is made of. Without wishing to sing his praises, I cannot help but say that he is an exceptional human being in many respects. His knowledge and skills in the manual field alone, and above all his versatility, are definitely admirable. However, his greatest strength lies on a completely different level. This is not material knowledge of all kinds, which he also possesses in abundance, but knowledge of the energy of creation, which contains completely different facts than is usually assumed. Creation energy knowledge and skills can only be acquired through intensive study of the so-called creation energy teaching. This mainly concerns the universally valid laws and recommendations of nature and creation, the application and functioning of the power of creation and the like. In order to acquire such knowledge and skills, Billy was dependent on extraterrestrial help, and it is therefore understandable that he has been in contact with extraterrestrial intelligences since his earliest adolescence, sometimes in telepathic form, but in most cases personally face-to-face and through inspirations that he occasionally receives from very high, immaterial forms of creation energy. I will go into more detail in the next chapter. In and of itself, there is nothing unusual about UFO contactees being more or less antagonized. Unfortunately, this is especially true for Billy. In order to prevent the dissemination of the truth at all costs, certain circles tried to silence him by simply wanting to send him to the afterlife. In 1975-76 alone, he was the target of 3 dastardly assassination attempts. His enemies labeled him as a mixture of Einstein and Till Eulenspiegel, or insulted him as a charlatan and fraudster, which still happens to some extent today. But despite all the intrigues and slander, sometimes even from within his own ranks, not one iota of what evil tongues would like to pass off as truth has been proven to date. A completely new phase in Billy's life began on the 28th of January 1975, when the 11-year contact period with the Pleiadian Simyase was initiated. This point in time can be regarded as the actual beginning of his missionary activity, which he was to realize as a proclaimer of the unadulterated truth and as a pioneer of a better future. Since then, he has also no longer pursued a normal professional activity, but has worked tirelessly to fulfill his difficult task. However, it would go far too far to list all the many obligations and activities that Billy now had to fulfill, despite all the adverse circumstances. In the spring of 1977, he moved from his original home in Hinwil to Hinterschmidruti in the Terce Valley in the Zurich Oberland, where he now lives. It bears the euphonious name Semjasa Silver Star Center, in honor of his extraterrestrial girlfriend Simyase, who was particularly active in all matters during the construction phase. This is also the headquarters of Phi Guo Air, which was founded by Billy in August 1975, but whose actual founding meeting did not take place until later, on the 17th of June 1978 in Hinterschmidruti. Phi Guo is the abbreviation for Freie Interessengemeinschaft Universelle, a non-profit organization and a community of seekers and researchers in the spirit of universal truth, etc. The whole area of the center includes a few hectares of forest, as well as good land that is used for agriculture, a farmhouse and some smaller outbuildings. When we took over this farmhouse, we were greeted by a miserable hovel of a so-called dwelling house, surrounded by mud, a dilapidated shed and land all around that was desolately overgrown. It therefore took years of endeavor and hard work from everyone involved to restore it to its current state, which can easily be described as paradisiacal compared to before. the statements from Moosbrugger's booknote, Diversicum, are confirmed by all human beings who have known my father since his childhood or since his younger years, because they all agree that he never rested on his laurels, but often worked like a robot and continued to strive towards a goal that was still invisible to his fellow human beings. Even if the Plejaren supported him in his learning, this did not mean that his work of consciousness was taken away from him by apparatuses or devices, because even the Plejaren cannot put the much-vaunted Nuremberg funnel on anyone to take away their learning. And so my father had to learn more and harder than any other human being on Earth, because the goal he had to achieve was far above the goals that human beings on Earth are capable of setting for themselves. Two of my experiences. In June 1976, Hans Schutzbach traveled with my mother Calliope, my older siblings Gilgamesha and Atlantis, and Amata Stetteter, an older woman who was interested in Billy's contacts, to the Oberdörfler Riet in Betschholz near Hinwil. Dad had driven ahead of us on his moped and then left us waiting a few hundred meters from the contact location. On this eventful day, he met up with Quetzal, Simyase, and her sister Plagia. My then 6-year-old brother Atlantis was the first to spot a silver-grey round object in the cloudless sky, which rose above the forest only about 300 meters away. We were amazed when it quickly gained height and traveled off in a westerly direction. We were able to follow the ship for almost 10 minutes, and I remember that day and my impressions vividly, even though I was only 3 years old at the time. Hans Schutzbach had urged my father over and over again to get him permission to take photos of the beam ships during daytime sightings. However, my father had warned him against this and explained to him that he would not be able to take decent pictures at such a moment anyway, because he would be far too nervous at the sight of a beam ship. In fact, things also turned out exactly as father had predicted. When the ship was noticed by Atlantis, who immediately drew everyone's attention to it, Hans Schutzbach began to run around completely uncontrollably. And when he had finally caught himself to the point where we thought he was finally ready to take pictures, his camera also fell out of his hand. Out of sheer excitement, he reached in vain several times for the camera lying on the ground, which slipped out of his clearly trembling hands each time, until he finally managed to take a single but barely usable picture of the ship, which was already a long way away and only appeared as small as a pinhead. What a pity that he wasted such a rare opportunity with his emotional and uncool reaction. Many human beings believe that aliens should land in public, but they reject this as too dangerous. Having witnessed as an almost 4-year-old how a man can go crazy when he actually sees a beam ship, even though he knows about extraterrestrials and UFOs, I fear the reactions of the public just as much as the Plejaren. Unfortunately, the human beings of our planet are not ready for such contact at this time. This will only be the case when we Earthlings learn to accept the foreign and meet it in peace and harmony, which, it seems to me, may still take some time. 4 years later, in the summer of 1980, at Cederlegg between Schmidruti and Sitzberg in the Zurich Oberland, I was able to experience the sound that such a beam ship is capable of producing. Back then, on a warm summer evening, my mother and I, my siblings Atlantis and Gilgamesha, as well as Engelbert, Maria and Connie Vector, Jacobus Bertschinger and Eva Bieri had set off for Cederlegg armed with audio tapes on my father's instructions. Dad positioned us at various points about 200 meters away from the contact point, which we could fully see, and instructed the adults to stop anyone who was curious. It had just started to rain lightly when, a few minutes after Dad had left us, a distant deafening buzz cut the air. I felt as if my hearing was about to be shredded, because the sound reached an intensity that I had never heard before or since. Mum had taken her own sound recorder with her at the time, and Dad had given her such a good location that she managed to make the best recordings. Twice before, my father had tried to capture the whirring of the ships on tape, but both times troublemakers and wonder-noses had turned up and thwarted my father's intentions. Only now, when he had taken his men with him, who promptly kept all the Gawkers away from the contact site, did the endeavor succeed. These two experiences were two of my most important, and without the Pleayaran's permission, neither the other people present nor I would ever have been able to witness such things, which will always remain closed to other human beings. It is therefore all the more incomprehensible that my mother, who shares these experiences with me and the others present, turns against father, and tries to hatefully drag everything she has seen and heard into the mud. Many human beings on this planet would give anything to be able to experience something like this, but my mother obviously does not appreciate it, or she is incapable of realistically processing what she has seen and experienced and drawing sensible conclusions from it. Otherwise, I cannot explain her behavior. Kill Billy Meyer. Why? By 1998, a total of 16 assassination attempts had been made on my father Noak. By 2024, there had already been some attacks, with witnesses also being present on various occasions, who were even at risk of being hit by a bullet themselves. For example, on Dog Hill in the Ashoka compound in Mehrauli, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, religious philosopher and President of India, 1962, to 1967, also misses. Then once each Elsie Moser and Amata Stetter in the center compound, there twice Silvano Lehmann and once Engelbert Wachter. A third time, Billy and Silvano were traveling by car when the windscreen was shot into and damaged in Saland, and they both saw the shooter, who immediately ran off with a rifle in his hands and disappeared. Silvano was not going to let this happen and drove straight to Pfeffikon to report the incident to the police. The police officer present just laughed and said that a stone from a passing lorry had probably hit the windscreen and broken it, although he was clearly told that the shooter had been seen and that there were no other cars on the road at the time. Daniel L. was also at risk, but fortunately the bullet, which was fired from a trailer shelter about 30 meters away, ricocheted off a tree and flew away without causing any damage. The attack was also witnessed by Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Stevens, USF Ret, who was present when Billy was shot. The two were sitting together on the divan in front of the house, having a conversation, when suddenly Billy was shot at from the footpath, about 50 meters away, with a large caliber weapon. The bullet whizzed just past Billy's head and smashed into the wall, blowing off a palm-sized piece of plaster, after which the 9mm bullet fell down and disappeared under the divan, where my sister Gilgamesha retrieved it. Willem Mondrian and Marianne Ulinger were also at risk in 2023, sitting with Billy in front of the entrance to the house, and if it had not been for a lowly intelligent mishap on the part of the shooter, who fired the shot into the sky while trying to shoot Billy from the footpath, one or other of the persons would have been hit. The first assassination attempt in Switzerland took place in Hinwil in January 1976. Note, all attacks except the first one in Mehrauli, India, which was effectively witnessed by reputable witnesses, were carried out in Switzerland. The first one was committed when I was just over 2 years old. My father was in his study on the first floor, where he was busy printing a small magazine, the Stimme der Wasser Mannzeit, when suddenly a shot rang out and the window pane shattered. The bullet, which had been fired at father from a rifle outside, missed him so narrowly that he could feel the airflow from the bullet on his head. The projectile then ricocheted off a copper spiral hanging from the ceiling and drilled into the office ceiling, where it left a large hole. It was only years later, when we had been living in Hinterschmidruti for a long time, that my father was visited by a foreign woman who confessed to the attack and credibly assured him that she deeply regretted what she had done and apologized. she was prompted to commit the murder by her membership of a sect in Bulach, according to whose abstruse teachings extraterrestrial life is not only impossible, but simply the devil. See Voice of the Age of Aquarius, number 23, pages 12–14. Even when my father was a boy, various members of the sect turned against my father, incited by a Mrs. From her point of view at the time, the woman who contacted Billy was only trying to save humanity from the direct influence of Satan, as she asserted when she apologized to Billy. It was only later, when she began to see through the religious heresies of the sect and was able to detach herself from them, that she was able to recognize that there could be nothing devilish about my father's contacts, and her guilty conscience then prompted her to go and see father and confess everything to him, who left it at that, as is his way, and did not make a fuss about it, but simply let what had happened be forgotten as having happened, because such things cannot be changed anyway. Besides, an honest excuse me is worth so much to him that he simply passes over what happened and forgets everything for all time. However, two things are typical of this incident. On the one hand, it is my father's fearlessness, with which he strengthens his mission and makes it truthful through his behavior in this way, whereby he consciously and deliberately steps on the toes of many human beings as well as associations, groups and organization, which is why he is naturally a thorn in their side. On the other hand, it is also his generosity and selflessness, with which he accepted the excuse me from the perpetrator, who had seriously attempted to extinguish his life. Hardly any other human being would be able to overlook such an act with such equanimity, without screaming bloody murder afterwards and immediately calling the police on the delinquent, because after all, the offense was far from time-barred, and I do not know whether it was time-barred, but it does not matter to my father, when the perpetrator turned up at my father's house and made a full confession, which would have put her behind bars for years according to the letter of the law. Dad, however, does not see such things from the perspective of normal human beings, but has his own attitude to such things, which also enabled him to recognize the woman's honest remorse and generously accept her excuse me. In view of this and the other murders, which often came about under rather obscure circumstances, I ask myself why a man who is supposed to be nothing more than a swindler and a cheat is so frequently targeted for death. Are there perhaps human beings out there who know the truth about my father and his mission, and to whom he might be dangerous? Or, for whatever reason, is it simply to prevent real knowledge of extraterrestrial life from being publicized among the general population? I think one of these reasons will probably apply, because no one tries to eliminate human beings for nothing. Just think of the men in black, who often got in my father's way. The fact is that father, the Figu members and many other human beings are doing everything they can to help the truth prevail in every respect. It is not only religions and sects that keep humanity away from the knowledge of the truth, from progress and therefore also from further development, but also many other movements, groups and organizations for whom a lazy and comfortable, effeminate and easily manipulated humanity fits in wonderfully with their concept. However, the indoctrination of Christian religions and their saints, gags, as well as other religions and their sects, are the worst in their effects on the thinking of human beings. Through them, humanity is deliberately deprived of the true events that took place around Jesus Christ, whose real name was Emmanuel, and other founders of religions. Worse still, Emmanuel's teaching, the teaching based on the creation energy teaching, was twisted, falsified and changed to such an extent that today it enslaves the thinking of religious human beings and confines them within narrow boundaries instead of liberating them, making them great, independent and wise. Through the machinations of power-hungry religious bigwigs and their often lowly intelligent and ignorant or blinded helpers, it has been possible to turn the truth into its opposite, and also to present this opposite as desirable. as is also the case in all other existing religions and sects that have emerged falsely from the everlasting teachings of Emmanuel, or from other teachings or even false teachings of earth humans. Millions and millions human beings have been so alienated from their destiny of true human being since time immemorial that they are only able to find their way with great difficulty, if at all. All Christian, Islamic and Jewish heresies, together with their countless sects, refer to the books of the Old Testament, which are supposed to contain the true teachings of Emmanuel and other prophets, whereby Christianity in particular also has the New Testament at its disposal for its incredible fraud and deception. It has long been known, and it is also openly admitted by the Christian religions, that these books were often written centuries after the actual events. The 46 books of the Old Testament were pieced together from various traditions over the centuries, usually long after the protagonists had passed away. Everything that is counted as the Old Testament today was only recorded on the basis of oral traditions, and not a single book was written by the person whose name it bears. The 27 books of the New Testament are no better, as these were also written long after the death of the people involved, and, as with the Old Testament, not a single author is identical to the person to whom the book is attributed. The entire Christian religion is therefore based solely on stories that its writers knew only from hearsay. There is an old and true saying, "You learn to lie from hearsay." Although my father is very knowledgeable about the Bible, he did not stop me from attending religious education lessons at school. This experience was very important for me, because on the one hand, I did not take everything my father told me at face value, and on the other hand, I was also curious about what religions had to offer. Fortunately, my father never told me what I should believe in. Today I have realized that only those human beings who know nothing need to believe, and that those who know nothing have also learned nothing. And that is exactly what religions and many politicians aim to do, namely to create fear by believing in what human beings are told, which makes it easy to keep everyone under control. My father stands up against these and other machinations. He is certainly not a flawless human being or a saint, because he is just like any other human being, and as such, he also makes mistakes from which he has to learn, just like all other human beings. Is the FIGU a commercial organization? The FIGU is a non-profit organization that is supported solely by the work and contributions of its members. Money raised from the sale of my father's writings, or from the sale of materials such as films, photos, postcards, T-shirts, etc., must not only be properly accounted for, but it is immediately channeled back into the mission, where it is used to print new writings or create new materials. Another part of the money that goes to FIGU is channeled into an aid campaign founded by my father called Russia Aid, or Active Alliance, which until 1998 regularly supported needy families in the former Soviet Union with food, clothing, and medicines. To ensure that the organization is not guilty of embezzlement and misappropriation, every cent must be accounted for. And as the money belongs solely to the organization, none of it also goes into the pockets of my father, who does not even receive a salary from the FIGU, although he works for them full-time. The only privilege he enjoys, and which he had to be talked into with the greatest patience and the tongues of angels, is that his flat in the center is rent-free. Even against this concession by the FIGU, he initially resisted vehemently, and only when even the Plea Yaran intervened and put their foot down did he reluctantly give in. People often accuse me that father and the FIGU are supposed to earn millions from the sale of books, photos, and films. This is a lie that is the brainchild of my money-hungry mother, who was hoping for these alleged millions when she divorced my father. However, neither my father nor FIGU have such sums of money. Father certainly does not, as he only lives on a small disability pension of a few hundred francs a month. With this, he can neither make big jumps nor rake in millions, as any normal human being would realize. If the millions that my mother fantasizes about were available, the FIGU would probably not be a non-profit-making association, and the members of the core group would certainly not have to take on the daily multiple burdens of work, homework and group work in order to ensure the survival of the association and its financial security. Of all people, the unworldly and unrealistic core group members have to stand their ground day after day in their professional lives to ensure that the money for the maintenance costs of the entire center is available month after month. What my father and the core group members have always said in public is also really true. The core group members and my father bear the costs of maintaining the buildings and grounds with their work alone. The core group members' monthly contributions are not exactly small, and yet it is not the case, as is also claimed, that they have to hand over all their wages to my father. Basically, it is not much different to a normal apartment block, where each party also has to pay their rent. The only difference is that the FIGU Association owns the property, and its members keep the association alive through their rent. Father is therefore neither the owner of Hinterschmidruti, nor does he own the association, which has long stood on its own 2 feet, and is self-sustaining. These are facts that can be verified by any human being, because the FIGU and its members are not hiding anything. They answer all questions openly at any time, and anyone who does not want to believe their word can freely check the facts with the authorities and officers. The so-called insider knowledge that my mother spreads about this, her fantasies of psychological terror and the members' bondage to my father, the abstruse stories about millions of euros and the loose lifestyle that my father allegedly led, and is still supposed to lead, arise solely from her morbid and twisted way of thinking, which is fueled by her terrible character flaws, to which she surrenders without a fight, and which she boasts about in public. Unfortunately, I have not seen much of the supposed love that Mum has for my father, and the high song she sings in public today, because otherwise everything would have turned out differently. On my own behalf, after everything I have seen and experienced in connection with my parents and the FIGU, I could not help but take the delicate step of going public after careful consideration. I cannot judge how you, dear reader, will take what I have told you here, but please bear in mind that everything I have laid out before your eyes corresponds to the bitter truth, which I can stand by at any time. My guiding principle is not to take revenge on my mother and give my father a free pass with my words, but rather I feel an obligation to create a small counterweight through my statements, which should help to straighten out my father's image, which has been completely thrown off balance by lies and false accusations. I would like to urge those human beings who oppose my father's work to seriously consider the issues that my father and the FIGU bring to their attention. For if human beings understood the importance of the message that my father received from the Pleiadion, and if they tried to live according to the laws and recommendations of creation, they would also realize that life on our planet would be much easier and better than it has been up to now. The human beings should learn to treat each other with respect and neighborly love and to accept each other as they are. But this also includes being helpful to each other instead of just living a self-centered life. The human being knows from personal experience the need to be able to confide in someone, and how many of us would have been happy many times if a helpful and selfless friend had been at our side when we had problems. I am not saying that you should take people's problems off their hands, but a good piece of advice or a helpful deed is not out of place for a human being who is courageously facing life's struggles. Real friendship is unfortunately rare among us human beings, and at the bottom of our hearts we all long for a life without violence. Hatred, envy, jealousy, subjugation, fear, paternalism, terror and war, etc., and we all want the same thing, namely love, peace and security, and a little prosperity, so that we can live carefree. Unfortunately, it took me a long time to come to this realization, because until recently, I also only cared about my own benefit. It was only the events of the last few months that got me thinking, and for the first time, I seriously considered what my father explained to me in private. I have begun to study his writings in particular more seriously over the past few months, and this has made me realize that it is my duty as a human being to change my life and openly stand by the truth. This has also given me the strength to put what I have written down with the intention of helping the facts to break through. It must be made quite clear that this little document was not written at the request of my father or the Figu, nor under any kind of duress. My opinion is that father has done, and continues to do, so much for me and his other children, that it is nothing more than right and proper for me to raise my voice for him here, and stand behind him. After what we witnessed and saw as children, it seems to me that it is high time we finally started to actively support my father's work, so that we can also continue it to a certain extent at a later date. Of course, I do not imagine that I can follow in my father's footsteps, as I lack his knowledge, understanding, wisdom and awareness, but I can do what he would have wanted me to do, which is to steer my life in the correct direction, and, through my attitude, set an example for others with my thoughts and actions, my thoughts and my actions to set an example to those human beings who, with their eyes wide open, are looking for a new path that is sustainable enough to lead them into a future worth living and worthy of human beings. And the path based on creation energy teaching is certainly that. My father often said and explained things to me that I neither wanted to hear nor understand, and he often stepped on my toes with his truths. Nevertheless, I am very grateful to have such a father, because he was able to gain infinitely more experience in his life than any other human being I know. My father's knowledge and wisdom is a great treasure for us children, and we can always benefit from his advice. Through his dealings with thousands of people, my father has acquired a knowledge of human nature that is unrivaled, and he always treats every human being with the appropriate respect and consideration, regardless of their personality and actions. This behavior alone is worthy of emulation and places him high above most people I have met, who like to distribute their respect and esteem according to their sympathy, instead of accepting every human being as a human being. Those who know my father personally, and those who have shorter or longer dealings with him, cannot say anything good or negative about him, because he treats all human beings equally well. Those who spread vile lies and untruths about my father should occasionally find out what their hatred of my father and his work is really based on, because he has certainly done them no more harm than he has also done to any other human being. Those who have never been to the center in person and yet think they know everything about the Figu and my father, and who spread their lies in this way, should get their butts up on the mountain above Wheeler, and, if they are capable of it, question the group members with a neutral attitude and discuss with them. Father is certainly not a superhuman, and I also do not want to portray him as such, but we should at least try to see him neutrally for what he is, and at least give some credit to his efforts for the conscious well-being of humanity. I can assure those human beings who are not able to understand and share his views and philosophy that they have nothing to fear from Father, because nothing is further from his mind than proselytizing, and the members of Figu also act in the same way as he does. So it seems only right to me to conclude by asking his opponents to simply leave him alone, because he is also not disturbing their peace. Idea and concept, Methuselah Meyer, explanation, Bernadette Brand.